A Shadow's Revenge by Ivan Kopaninko. Chapter 1. Hatred is a very peculiar thing. It has ended more lives than anyone can count. It has ruined more nations than currently exist, and it runs rampant when unchecked. Yet, hatred gave life meaning to many people. One such person, if you could call him a person anymore, was named Dark. It was a very unfitting name, for he was a paladin. He lived his life with the light in mind, doing everything righteous in the name of justice. That is, until he died, betrayed by the very light he served. Since the day he was born in the capital of the Western Kingdom, he had spent every day working to purge darkness. He went to the most prestigious school in the kingdom, Miss Warbler's School for Paladins, Priests, and Clerics. He ranked top of his class every year and graduated with the titles Most Promising Paladin, Most Powerful Paladin, and Top Student by achieving the best grades in the school's history. He learned many spells, learned to fight better than anyone in the Western Kingdom, and shortly after graduating became one of the 3 paladins in the Goddess of Light's personal squad. He slayed darkness all throughout the Western Kingdom, and was personally responsible for the capture of over 10,000 dark creatures and demons. He also participated in the First Great War, where all 5 kingdoms clashed. The evil Central Kingdom of Darkness attempted to conquer the continent, attacking the Southern Kingdom of Frost. Unfortunately for the Central Kingdom, the Northern Kingdom of Fire, the mysterious Eastern Kingdom of Stone, and the Western Kingdom of Light had been planning an attack in cooperation with the Southern Kingdom for the last 3 years. Once the Kingdom of Darkness sent its forces into the south, they were defenseless from the forces of the other 4 kingdoms. The Central Kingdom of Darkness was destroyed, with almost every citizen captured by another kingdom. Dark led the charge on behalf of the Western Kingdom, and he captured 98% of the total citizens. After breaching the defenses with the help of his friends, Derek, a near-perfect priest, Rita, a cleric who could smite even a demon, and a few dozen other warriors, he used his power to bind the citizens in place for the 2 days it took for them to be rounded up and shipped into the Western Kingdom for trials and rehabilitation. He did all of this, might I add, before the age of 19. But of course, this story is not about how grand Dark was as a paladin, nor is it about the war between the kingdoms. This story is about what happened after the war. The citizens of the Kingdom of Darkness were brought back to the Kingdom of Light, and the Dark was to report back to the Goddess of Light for his next mission. When he arrived, however, his entire life took a turn. Dark arrived in the capital city of the Western Kingdom. The city had tall white and yellow walls, thicker than an elephant, taller than a house, and they shone brightly with blue gems placed in neat rows halfway up the walls. The gems casted protection spells on the city, meaning that in order to destroy the walls, someone would first need to extract each individual gem with a high-tier spell before they could even damage the walls. This would waste more energy than any spellcaster could use, and since the Western Kingdom had walls like these on every city, when the Kingdom of Light claimed that it would manage the land of the now non-existent Central Kingdom, the other nations didn't argue. Inside these walls was the first layer of the city. This layer contained markets, homes, factories, labor camps, churches, and any other buildings needed by the citizens of the city. All of the buildings looked quite similar, with blue window frames, white and yellow walls, and a single spire at the top containing the symbol of the Goddess of Light, a golden circle with a hammer inside. The entrance to the circular city was at the southern end, while the Goddess of Light's palace was located along the northern edge. Between the palace and the entrance there was a wide and beautiful road lined with fountains shooting light instead of water into the sky. The light would fall into the fountain like water would, and any who touched it would be cleansed of sin and pain. The road was nicknamed the Holy Mile because it stretched over a mile in length, passing Miss Warbler's College, hundreds of houses, most of the market district, and a few churches before reaching the Goddess of Light's estate. The Goddess of Light was the only goddess to come down to the continent, and she led the kingdom for hundreds of years. Dark walked past familiar houses and taverns where he had often spent his days. He remembered the many hours he spent at the training ground while he walked past it, and he remembered how many years he spent learning in the great libraries scattered throughout the city. Finally, after 20 minutes of walking, he reached the goddess' palace. The palace itself was the tallest building in the city, standing with over 10 stories in height. Not even dark had been above the second floor, and there were many rumors of what happened up there. Some said it was where the treasures of the kingdom were kept, but it was all speculation. When Dark entered the palace, he walked through the beautiful courtyard. The courtyard had fountains similar to the ones on the road, and many flowers that could not be found anywhere else in the world. The courtyard had 2 paths through it, a scenic route stretching around the entire palace, and a quick route leading straight into the throne room. Dark didn't have time to waste, so he took the short route and entered the throne room. He heard conversation inside, so he stood around a corner in a narrow hallway and listened. The corridor was very short, a few steps at most. He could barely hear through the solid wooden door, but with his heightened senses, he could make out most of their conversation. The goddess was speaking with someone else, whose voice Dark didn't recognize. "Where are they?" the unfamiliar voice demanded from the goddess. Dark was tempted to enter the room and chastise the man for speaking with such manner to his goddess, but he waited. "Why, whatever do you mean?" The goddess spoke with a soft yet sarcastic voice. Dark was confused. He knew the goddess to be kind and relatable. She rarely made jokes or talked sarcastically. My people. My family. What did you do to them?" The unfamiliar man continued. The man was clearly afraid, and Dark expected the goddess to comfort him. "So that's who you are," the goddess said. "An elf thinks he can save his family." The elves were the dominant race among the kingdom, amongst the citizens of the Central Kingdom, and Dark knew that they had stronger magic than humans like him. But, Dark thought, what could she mean about saving his family? He thought that they must be joking. The goddess of light wouldn't ever kill anyone, right? Please, the elf begged. "I'll do anything. Please, don't kill them." "Your family had no chance to win against the light. By trying to fight, they chose death." How could the goddess kill people? That's impossible, Dark thought again. His head started to spin, and he couldn't think straight. "Ha!" the goddess bellowed. "This is priceless. It seems one of my own has listened in on our conversation, little elf. It's your lucky day. I'm sure he will kill you quicker than I would have. Come inside, Dark." Dark couldn't feel his legs, but slowly he entered the room. Inside stood the elf, a tall man with purple skin and pointy ears. His clothes made him look like he was nobility, or at least they would if they were not all ripped from his long run into the throne room. Also in the room stood the goddess of light, a pale girl who looked to be in her mid-20s, but a little short. She wore a white toga with her logo patterned around like polka dots would be on a normal dress, and a crown with a large ruby in the center. She wore golden jewelry on her ears, 10 rings on her fingers, and her arms were lined with bracelets. "Hi?" he barely managed to say through his fear. "This elf rebelled against me," the goddess said, ignoring Dark's obvious fear. "Kill him, and I will forgive you for eavesdropping on me." The elf spoke again through tears. "Please don't kill me, Paladin. I did nothing wrong. She tried to kill me." He pointed at the goddess. "Nonsense," the goddess said, looking more like a symbol of evil than purity. "I wouldn't have killed you or your family. Elf blood is worth a fortune and has enough magic to keep me alive for ages. I would have simply tortured you for the rest of your life. It would have been fun. But no, you decided to rebel. Your family decided to fight, and you barely managed to run here. Your time is up. Dark, kill him." Dark was conflicted. There was no way he could survive a fight with the goddess, but he couldn't kill the elf either. He thought about it for a little bit too long. Suddenly, the elf's eyes turned yellow. The elf screamed. It wasn't a scream done by a child on a roller coaster or on a horse ride. To Dark, the scream was a second long, and the elf disappeared, leaving not even ash behind him. But to the elf, time stopped. The goddess had casted the spell Holy Torture, a special spell that caused time to stop for an individual and for them to burn proportionally to how dark their blood was. Elves have the darkest blood, haven't been citizens of the central kingdom of darkness itself. Where Dark saw the elf scream for a single second, the elf felt like he had been burning for a month. The elf felt as if his eyes were replaced by fire, and the flame burned through his body, reaching each organ once at a time. Every minute he thought that he had reached the maximum amount of pain that he could feel. Every minute he was proven wrong. His organs withered away in what felt like 2 weeks, but because of the nature of the spell, he only died after his skin had burned and his blood had evaporated. He felt pain the whole time, and when the month ended, he was relieved. Dark fell to his knees. He looked at the ground where only a moment ago the elf begged for his life. Dark wished he could tell the elf's family what happened, but what could he really do? He didn't know the elf's name, and the elf didn't have any remains. Dark had bigger problems right now. The goddess stood up from her throne and looked down on him, frowning. "You wouldn't have felt all that pain if you were a little more loyal," she said. "That's it? You killed this man, and you're saying it's my fault? You're not a goddess. You're a monster." Dark no longer felt sadness, only rage. He took out his holy hammer. He stood up and prepared to cast a spell. But before he could, he saw his arm in the air, separate from the rest of his body. The goddess had cut off both his arms in the blink of an eye, but luckily enough for Dark, he didn't feel pain. This was because less than a second after he saw his arm was cut off, his head followed. Chapter 2. It was the first time in Dark's life that he had heard true silence. He couldn't hear the sounds of the city, his heart beating, the wind blowing, or his own breathing. He heard true silence. He smelled nothing either. The smell of fire and blood from only a moment ago had disappeared. He couldn't feel his arms, legs, nose, body, or the clothes he had been wearing a second ago. He couldn't see anything, but he didn't see darkness. It was not that he couldn't see. It was that there was nothing for him to see. But despite all this, he was not dead. And slowly, as if in a game, a little box appeared in his vision. The box was quite simple. It was white, and in black text on the right side was the word light, while on the left side was the word dark. Dark knew what this window meant, because he saw a similar one when he chose to become a paladin. The window then had many different options, including paladin, cleric, priest, swordsman, and a couple dozen more. That window allowed him to choose what class he would become. At that time, every class had a little description to explain what it did and what abilities it had. This window did not have any descriptions. Dark could either choose the box that said light, or the box that said dark. Where am I? Dark thought, momentarily ignoring the window. Am I dead? No, I can't be dead. If I was dead, I wouldn't get to make a choice here. Dark wondered for a while about what he was to do now. He couldn't think very well. He remembered the death of the elf, and the memory replayed itself in his head like a broken record player. Dark made a decision. There is no way that I want anything to do with the kingdom of light. I will destroy the kingdom and kill that goddess if it's the last thing I do. After Dark thought those words, the boxes in front of him disappeared. He heard a deep, booming voice in his head. Successfully chosen Dark. Beginning rebirth sequence. Dark had never heard a message like this one. The message he had usually heard said something like new skill unlocked or quest given, but he had never heard of anyone being reborn. Before he had time to think about what he was being reborn as, he heard another message. Rebirth sequence finished. Before Dark was worried, but now he was utterly confused. He had been reborn, but he still couldn't see anything, hear anything, smell anything, or feel anything. Where could he be? He hoped that he would wake up in his bed and learn that everything had been a dream. But he didn't wake up. Suddenly, as if in a wave, the rage he felt when the elf was killed resurfaced, and he remembered the words of his favorite teacher at his school, Miss Warbler. Never be angry. If you feel angry, it is your duty as a holy man to suppress that rage. For rage is what causes hatred, and hatred causes suffering. Dark thought, was the goddess angry with me? I did nothing wrong. Neither did the elf. Why did he have to suffer? Is it all my thought? He reasoned with himself, wondering why the goddess killed him. But he could only think of one thing. I knew her secret. I learned that she was not a good person. That is why she killed me. It wasn't about hatred, rage, or anger. I got in the way, and she was stronger than me. This won't happen again. I will be stronger. His rage returned to him, but he didn't push it away. I will kill the goddess and her whole empire. Nothing can stop me. Nothing. New skill unlocked. Shadow's vision. He unlocked a skill, as he had done many times in the past. Now all he had to do was raise his right arm, and he could open the menu where he could read. He realized that he couldn't feel anything. Did he even have an arm? There was still one thing he could do. He could activate the skill without knowing what it did. But should he have? He was taught many times not to use a skill he didn't know about. What if it hurt him? But did he really have a choice? He didn't want to continue thinking without any senses, so he activated the skill. All he had to do was think, activate skill, Shadow's vision. And his eyes started to open. The first thing he noticed was that his vision was from a much lower angle than humans, as if he were a garden gnome looking up into the sky. His vision started to settle, and he could see that he was in a cave. The cave had a low ceiling, maybe about 6 feet tall, with 2 narrow exits on opposite sides. The cave had occasional crystals giving off light. He knew these crystals were valuable, as they were lower-leveled versions of the ones present on the walls of the Western Kingdom cities. But his main focus was on the center of his vision, where he saw a creature different from anything he had ever seen before. It looked as if a shadow had decided to walk off of a wall. It was a cloud of black, thick smoke slowly spinning in a circle, with no real features like eyes and no limbs. Dark almost felt bad for the creature, because it seemed like its creator gave up before finishing it. The smoke creature was about 5 feet tall, shaped like a butterfly's cocoon. Dark wondered if the creature before him could move, so he decided to take one step towards it. Strangely enough, he didn't move. When he decided to move forward, he stayed put. The shadow cocoon moved forward, but he stayed put. He tried again, this time moving to the left. Again, he stayed put, but the shadow moved to the left. It was as if he was looking in the mirror at his reflection, except when he moved, the reflection moved. Then Dark looked to the right. He didn't choose to look to the right. His vision just sharply turned to the right without asking him where he wanted to look. Suddenly, his vision split. It felt weird, as if he had suddenly gained another eye. On the left half of his vision, he could see the shadow from the front view, but on the right half of his vision, he could see the shadow from the side view. It was as if his eyes were located 15 feet apart and were looking at the same thing. But then, his eyes shifted to look at each other, and Dark realized something. In his left eye, he could see the shadow on the right and a little green frog in front of him. In his right eye, he could see the shadow on the left and a little blue frog in front of him. He realized, with a jump, that he was seeing through the 2 frogs' eyes. But then, who was he? He couldn't move either frog. He couldn't choose where to look or where to move. The only thing he could control was the shadow cocoon, which he could make move simply by attempting to move himself. Then he realized why. He was the shadow cocoon. The abomination before him, that he had never seen as a paladin, was him. It made sense. He could control it. His shadow's vision skill must allow him to see through the eyes of nearby creatures, he concluded. How can I live like this? He wondered. I can't leave these frogs, or I will be blind, and I can't hear, smell, or feel anything. He started moving in circles, getting used to his movements. He tried to jump, and learned that he could kind of float. He tried to run and learned that he could float quickly, almost to the speed of an average sprint. He tried to touch the ground, and he could, but he couldn't feel anything. He tried to change his shape, and he could. He experimented by trying to give himself limbs. He could give himself arms, but he couldn't make fingers or hands. The second he lost focus on his newly made limbs, he returned to his normal cocoon-shaped form, almost like he was made out of putty. While he was experimenting, the frogs had moved in close to each other and were croaking at each other. Dark noticed that neither frog had looked at him, and neither frog had given any indication that he was there. He positioned himself between the two frogs, and they still didn't do anything. Can they not see me? Dark thought. He decided to investigate further, and tried touching one of the frogs. New skill unlocked. Shadow's servant. New host confirmed. Frog. Dark could not see through the vision of the frog he touched, but in the other frog's vision, what he saw scared him. It was as if he, the shadow, had melted into the frog. A second ago, the frog had been green, but now it was pitch black with red eyes. Dark was afraid. What happened to the frog? Then he could no longer see what the blue frog could. His only vision was that of the now black frog. He tried to move back out of the frog, but instead of him moving back, the frog moved backwards. He tried moving left. The frog moved left. He tried moving right. The frog moved right. He realized that he controlled the frog now. He could stick his tongue out like a frog. He could hop like the frog would. He could look around. The skill Shadow's servant allowed him to take control of the frog, and he could do whatever he wanted. Then, suddenly, he could hear. Hello? 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 Dark was surprised to hear the other frog talking to him, and in English no less. The frog continued. Hey, you okay? What happened? How did you change colors? Dark responded to him by asking, You can understand me? Where am I? Who are you? One question at a time. I am Fane, the leader of the frogs in this cave. We all live a little deeper into the cave. He pointed at one of the two exits from the current cave. You are currently in the second level of this great cave, although I'm not sure how you could be in here without that knowledge. You can safely travel down to the third level, but if you go any deeper than that, you're at a large risk of being attacked by snakes. Dark wasn't particularly afraid of snakes, and he wasn't interested in going deeper into the cave. His goal was to destroy the goddess of light, and she was at the surface. I'll be leaving the cave then, Dark said. It's that way, right? Dark pointed at the other exit to the cave. The one that the frog didn't say led downwards. The frog looked appalled. You want to go up? That's insane. You wouldn't be able to hop twice before a wolf ate you. Dark hesitated. He didn't particularly want to be eaten by wolves, but he also didn't want to live in a cave. He thought for a while and decided that if he could take control of a wolf instead of a frog, he could easily escape from the cave. The real question was, how could he get out of this frog's body and back into his shadow form? He could meditate, try to increase his physical abilities, a strategy that would potentially allow him to unlock new skills. Either way, this frog in front of him couldn't help, and it would be best not to reveal anything to him to be safe. Goodbye. I'll be leaving now, Dark said to the frog, knowing it was rude. What? No. I answered your questions, and you have to answer mine, and I already told you going up is impossible. But by the time the other frog had said the words, Dark had left the cave through the entrance going upwards. The frog was disappointed that a potential friend would soon die. However, as the frog knew there was no way to save Dark, he decided to do the sensible thing and mope at his home. This was not a bad thing for Dark, because he didn't need a friend. Dark needed power, and fast. He didn't actually rush to the top floor of the cave like the other frog thought he did. He simply walked a little outside of the room and sat down. Outside of that current part of the cave was a long corridor going up, presumably to the top floor of the cave. This corridor still had the magic crystals, but the higher up, the less the crystals shone. This was not a big concern for Dark, because right now he was focused on how he could defeat the wolves above him and escape the cave. He looked around to see what he could work with. There were pebbles on the ground, magic crystals in the walls, but nothing else. Dark wanted to get the magic crystals out of the walls, perhaps to use them as weapons. He tried to touch one of the lower crystals, and it was barely out of reach. He shot his long tongue at it to touch it, and he suddenly felt a painful shock. Using the magic crystal was out of the question. It had electrocuted him. Dark thought for a while and devised a plan. He made all the necessary preparations and walked through the corridor and into the top level of the cave. The top level of the cave was bigger than the previous corridor and second level, but it was not too large. In front of Dark, 2 wolves sat in a little nest made up of leaves. The wolves looked hungry, and they looked at Dark, ready for him to make a move. Dark was hoping the wolves wouldn't want to eat a frog, but he had prepared for this situation. Behind the wolves' nest there was a small water fountain, flowing into a small pool taking up more than half of the room. This level was quite unique compared to the lower ones, because instead of being on the sides, the magic crystals hung from the ceiling like stalactites. The exit to the cave was behind the water fountain, so Dark knew that if he tried to run straight for the exit, the wolves would catch him. But, as I mentioned earlier, Dark had a plan. Dark had spent over 2 hours preparing for this. He had gathered hundreds of small pebbles in his mouth, and now he spit them all out. He hoped that the wolves would slip on them and fall, like in cartoons. The 2 wolves ran at Dark, and one of them, luckily, tripped on the pebbles, losing balance for half a second. Unfortunately for Dark, 1 second was not enough. The wolf had gotten back up before Dark could even think of his next move. The second wolf hesitated when its friends doubled, but at this point both were about a step away from Dark. Dark knew that his death was likely, and there was no way he could fight these wolves head-on, so he had to run. The wall, Dark thought. Dark's plan was to run up the wall behind them and stick to the ceiling until he reached the exit of the cave. He didn't have time to run to the wall, so he waited for a split second. In that split second, one wolf jumped at Dark, giving them perfect opportunity. The wolf had likely never met a frog with intelligence like the one in front of him, and you could imagine his surprise when Dark jumped directly onto his head, jumped again, and stuck to the ceiling with his sticky frog legs. Dark was not that lucky, though, as when he jumped onto the wall, he realized that he could not move further. In order to move further on the wall, he would need to move his legs. The second he released his legs, he would fall down to the wolves below. On the bright side, now that Dark was on the ceiling, he could think of his next move for as long as he wanted. The wolves were not going to give up, as they were very hungry. They stepped into the pool and stood directly under Dark. Dark thought that his situation was quite bad. He was directly above 2 wolves, and although they would be uncomfortable in the water, he couldn't do anything as long as they stayed there. Or could he? Dark eyed around the cave and saw the magic crystals hanging from the ceiling. The nearest one was just within the reach of his tongue. Dark thought of a plan. He shot his tongue out and hit the crystal with as much strength as he could. The crystal shocked him and wiggled a little bit. The shock gave him a painful headache, and he lost his train of thought. He needed almost a minute to recover and regain his composure. But despite the light pain, he was very happy. Perfect. I can do this. It might take a few more tries, but after I deal with these 2, the rest of my journey will be easy. I'll kill that goddess faster than I thought. He was getting ahead of himself, but he was partially correct. Every time he shot his tongue at the crystal, it wiggled a little more, but he got shocked. The wolves stared up at him confused, but didn't catch on to his plan. After about 15 times, Dark stopped feeling the crystal's shock, and luckily, after shooting his tongue at the crystal just 23 times, the crystal gave one last wiggle and fell off the ceiling. The crystal was still giving off a shock when it fell into the water, and Dark heard a little splash, followed by the fizzing of electrified water. Shortly after, the wolves howled in pain. Within a few seconds, the wolves stopped making sounds, and the shocking had stopped. The smell of fire filled the cave, and it reminded Dark of the smell of the dying elf. His rage resurfaced, but he suppressed it, thinking that he had something more important to do at the moment. Dark jumped into the water, feeling lucky that his plan worked. He looked over at the wolves and realized that one of them was still breathing. He was a little surprised, but decided that this was for the better. He wanted to take control of the wolf, because undoubtedly he could do more in a wolf's body than a frog. Of course, like a parasite, Dark planned to hop from host to host in order to gain strength. For now, a wolf would do. He hopped and landed on top of the wolf's head. Now, all he had to do was figure out how to switch hosts and take control of the wolf. He activated his Shadow's Vision skill by simply thinking to activate it, so maybe this skill would work the same way. He sat on top of the wolf and thought, "Activate skill, Shadow's Servant." New host confirmed, Wolf. New skill unlocked, Soul Feast. Just after activating the skill, Dark began to float away into the depths of sleep. When he awoke, he didn't know how much time had passed. The bodies of the frog he possessed and the other wolf that were killed were laying next to him, and he was startled to see that the frog was dead. Dark fell asleep because when he took the body of the wolf was unconscious. He made a mental note of this before thinking of his next move. He theorized that if he got a human host, he could raise his right arm and access his skills menu, where he could learn exactly what he was. But he did get a new skill. Shouldn't he test it out? He decided that with a name like Soul Feast, the skill had to be worth testing. He thought in his head, activate skill Soul Feast. Dark witnessed as out of both the wolf and the frog, a cloud of smoke exited. The smoke traveled and entered his body instead. Souls absorbed. Next level, 2 out of 100. 2 out of 100. Did Dark have to find 100 souls to level up? What was the level up? When Dark was a paladin, he had never leveled up before. Clearly, activating the skill raised more questions than it answered. Dark decided to ignore the skill for now and focus on his next objective, leaving the cave. Chapter 3. The exit to the cave was only a few feet away from Dark, so he trotted towards it. His body felt more natural as a wolf. It felt similar to when he walked on all fours as a human, except now walking on 2 legs would be near impossible and his balance was much better. His paws hurt on the strange stone, and it felt a bit like he was wearing shoes. So this is what wolves feel like, Dark thought. He could see better, too. It was as if someone turned on the lights in the cave, because he could see every crack and crevice in the walls perfectly. But his hearing improved the most. He could hear every animal on the second floor of this cave, and he could even hear what was happening outside. Just by using his hearing, he could hear that right outside of the cave was a small forest with a flowing river cutting through it. He could hear snakes, frogs, dogs, squirrels, rabbits, and birds scurrying around the undergrowth. The sounds were too loud at first, but as he got used to them, he started being able to focus only on specific sounds, and soon he could control his new senses like he had them forever. He slowly walked past the waterfall and saw that the exit to the cave was directly behind it. He walked through the cold water and felt happy as the warm sunlight touched him again. He would have smiled if he could in this wolf form. He was already hard at work trying to figure out a few things. He wanted to know what nation he was in, where the nearest town was, and how long he had been in that cave for. Frogs age much faster than wolves, so would his lifespan match that of a frog or a wolf? Could he even die, because he was a shadow, not one creature? He decided that the answers would come in due time, and for now he should focus on finding some intelligent life. He realized that he was not in a normal forest. The river, a few feet away from him, was stunning. Unlike normal rivers that twist and turn, this river's banks ran perfectly parallel to each other. The 2 banks were not far apart, only about 30 feet, but the water's height changed too rapidly for the river to be natural. At some parts, the water was not deeper than Dark's paw could reach. The water looked clear, and the river's floor was a green layer of what looked like moss. In other parts, Dark could not even guess how deep the bottom was. The water looked black. The trees were gigantic. Most of them were taller than buildings, and some were taller than the Goddess of Light's estate. Dark was once again amazed by his new hearing. He could hear the birds chirping at the top of such big trees. He knew that many cities are built along rivers, so he decided to follow along it. He wondered what kind of creatures could live in water that changed heights every few feet, so he looked closer. He walked alongside the river for more than a minute and did not see a single creature inside. Surely something had to have adapted to live in this river, right? He asked himself. Dark decided to experiment and took a leaf from the ground and dropped it into the water at one of the deeper points. The leaf, that Dark knew should float, sank quickly into the water and didn't return. It was as if the leaf was a rock falling through the air. Dark was now very curious as to what this river was and what it could do. He walked a few feet to a shallow part of the river and put one paw inside. He felt his paw being slowly pulled as if by fate to touch the moss at the bottom of the river. His curiosity spiked, and he allowed his paw to be gently guided towards the moss. He didn't feel his paw touch the moss, so he assumed he needed to dip his paw in a little deeper. He did, but he still couldn't feel the moss. At this point, most of his front paw was in the water, and he should have felt the moss long ago. He looked down into the water, squinting closely, and noticed that his paw didn't touch moss. His paw was partially submerged in what felt like jello, so he tried to jerk his paw out of the water, but his paw didn't come out. His paw was stuck, and some strange force was pulling his paw deeper into the murky water. It was all he could do to stop his paw from moving downwards, and he had no strength left to make any progress on pulling his paw out. What would happen if he allowed himself to get sucked into the water? Would he drown? Would the jello be shallow enough for him to stand in it? If the latter were true, then he should have jumped in then, and then safely found a way out, instead of wasting his strength, stopping himself from being pulled inside. If the former was true, then letting himself be sucked in would mean his death. He decided that the former was more likely to be true, because for what reason would a force take the trouble of pulling things underwater just to let them go again easily? Once he decided that going underwater would be his death, his decisions became much easier. That isn't to say that he had an easy way out of the situation, just to say that he didn't have any choice but to continue trying to pull his paw out of the water while the mysterious force tried to pull it in. Dark worked well under pressure, so he managed to calm down and think. He focused on his hearing. Was there anyone nearby who could help? He heard rustling in the leaves a few feet away and decided to call out for help. "Help!" Dark yelled. "I'm stuck!" The rustling leaves were actually caused by a low-level duo of adventurers who were looking for monsters to hunt. To them, Dark's scream sounded like a wolf's desperate howl, and they rushed over to help. You can imagine their surprise when they saw a pure black wolf with bright red eyes, struggling with a single paw stuck in the water of the river. The duo consisted of two men, but they were not human. They were mermen. They had blue, scaly skin that glistened like diamonds in the sunlight. One had a black sword sheath strapped to his back, and a satchel slung along his waist. He wore brown pants, but was shirtless, and had a small bunch of black hair on his head. The other merman was a little shorter than the first, and instead of carrying a sword on his back, he had a small dagger strapped to his side, and a comically large backpack that could fit enough supplies for a 4-person group. Dark knew that mermen lived in the southern kingdom of Frost, so he assumed that this is where he was currently located. He let out a shallow whimper so that the merman felt bad for him, and luckily it worked. "Poor thing. Vic, can you save it?" the one with the backpack asked. Vic responded by saying, "Of course I can. How can I become a great adventurer if I can't save a single monster?" The two laughed to themselves, but Dark couldn't figure out why. Without another word, Vic jumped into the river and casted some form of spell. Then, as quickly as the merman entered the water, he jumped out to his friend. The force pulling Dark into the river vanished for a few seconds, and Dark managed to swim out of the river and reach the shore. Dark wanted to thank his saviors, but when he looked at them, he realized that they had drawn their weapons. "Sorry, little fellow," Vic said, "but you either died to us or to the river's spell, and I need to test my newest fighting style." Dark didn't bother trying to communicate with the mermen. They couldn't understand him anyway. Instead, he allowed his primal instincts to kick in as he fought for survival. Vic charged at Dark, outstretching his sword and spinning in a circle in a move he named the Wheel of Pain. Dark felt embarrassed for Vic. Who would purposely turn his back on their enemy, if only for a second? Dark took a small leap backwards and watched as Vic kept spinning. Vic's plan was to keep swinging in a circle while walking towards Dark, eventually slaying him. This was, of course, a ridiculous plan. After a couple of rotations, Dark waited until the merman was looking away from him and lunged at his calf. Chomp! Dark underestimated his own strength, and he bit right through the merman's shiny, scaly leg, while only trying to injure him. The merman fell to his knees and shouted for his companion to help him, but he was too late. His buddy with the backpack managed to throw him a healing crystal, but Dark was ready to strike before Vic could drink it. Dark lunged at the sidekick and bit him on the neck. Blood splattered, and he fell to the ground. Dark looked around, back to Vic, who was shocked by this development. Vic had been so shocked that he dropped his healing crystal, causing it to shatter and lose its healing effects. How could you kill him? I thought I was strong, Vic said, almost through tears. Dark decided that he could gain valuable information from Vic, and instead of killing him, picked up a knife, the knife left behind by Vic's sidekick. He walked over to the ground near Vic's cut leg and dipped the knife in blood. He then leaned down and, after double-checking that Vic had dropped his sword well out of his reach, took a few minutes to write on the ground. He wrote many of his questions in the thick dirt. What nation are we in? What is your name? What class are you? What was that river? Where is the nearest town? Lie to me, and I will kill you. The merman was very obviously scared by Dark's ability to write in English, but he pulled himself together and answered Dark's questions. We are currently in the southern nation of Frost. Dark already knew this, but he asked to be sure that the merman was telling the truth. After a small nod from Dark, the merman continued. My name is Vic Durman, and I am a low-powered swordsman in the nearby town of Osha. Osha is located just a few hundred feet down the river. I came here to train my spin attack against some monsters. I didn't expect it to cause me to lose a leg. You're going to lose a lot more than a leg, Dark thought, but said nothing, letting Vic continue. The river had a powerful spell left behind on it by a sorcerer from the Kingdom of Darkness. The spell sucked in the troops of the Southern Kingdom and caused many casualties. It also trapped fish and caused Osha to starve. The kingdom's plan was to stop food from entering the village, and threatened to starve the citizens to death if the Frost Kingdom didn't surrender. Luckily, when the other kingdoms attacked the Kingdom of Darkness, their forces here lost supplies and were forced to flee themselves. Rumors say that they didn't go back to their kingdom and are instead hiding somewhere in this kingdom. Dark was worried about this information. If there was a mage here skilled enough to cast an unknown spell on an entire river, the forces that are hiding here must be very strong. Perhaps they could have conquered the Southern Kingdom after all, but they decided not to on purpose? He wanted to know more about the forces from the Kingdom of Darkness, so he wrote another question on the ground. Where were the forces last seen? The merman looked shocked that anyone would want to find the forces of the Kingdom of Darkness, but he feared the punishment he would get if he didn't answer. They were last seen running towards a big cave at the end of this river. You can follow it downstream, and there will be a big 5-floored cave. They were last seen in that area, and the army chasing them decided that they got stuck in the cave. Dark knew that cave, because it was where he was reincarnated as a shadow. Who would know more about shadows than the Kingdom of Darkness's best warriors? Dark made up his mind. He would go to the nearest town, form a group of adventurers, and then go down into the cave and find those citizens of the Kingdom of Darkness to interrogate them. He could then kill them and demand a huge reward from the Southern Kingdom. The reward money could make him a hero of the Kingdom of Frost, and would help him attack that foolish goddess. His plan was set, and he had gotten the information he needed. Vic had lost his use. Dark walked over to the sidekick's bag and was lucky enough to find another healing crystal. Healing crystals changed color based on their power, with the best healing crystals being white, while the worst ones were red. As the power of the crystal increased, so did the shade of the color. This crystal was dark pink, meaning that it was relatively low-powered, but enough to heal Vic's leg. He gave the crystal to Vic and watched as he put the crystal up to his wound and said the word heal. The crystal shimmered a little, then shattered into white light. The light traveled into Vic's wound and slowly recreated his leg. Dark nodded, put his paw on Vic, and thought to himself, "Activate skill, Shadow's Servant." New host confirmed. Merman. Dark's increased hearing disappeared, and he was left staring at an unconscious wolf lying before him. He had taken control of Vic's body. His hearing had gotten worse, but he could finally feel a little bit of magic in his veins. He raised his right arm, and surely enough, the skill menu opened. The menu looked like the white window that had popped up before, asking him what class he wanted to choose, and the window that asked him to choose between light and dark. This window had 2 tabs at the top, and a few skills under each tab. This window, however, only took up the spot directly in front of him, and was semi-transparent. He could look around, and the window would always be directly at the center of his vision until he dismissed it. He knew all of this already, because he had opened this window thousands of times as a paladin, but he had never reached 2 tabs of skills. Each tab had a label, so he decided to start by reading the labels. The tabs said Host Skills and Personal Skills. It seemed that he could see both the skills of the merman he controlled and his own skills under different tabs. So he started by reading the skills of the merman. The merman had the skills Sword Beam. When activated, fires a projectile forward in the shape of a sword. And Dispel Magic. Negate the effects of any magic spell directly in front of you for a maximum of 5 seconds. Can be used once a day. Dark was used to the skill Sword Beam, as any adventurer with a sword had learned it. But the skill Dispel Magic was a semi-rare skill that could only be acquired by birth, with a 2% chance. Dark had learned that thousands of skills from his school, but only a handful could only be learned by being lucky at birth. Dark was curious about his own skills, so he switched to the tab showing, personal skills. He was quickly disappointed, because the window said, Shadow's Vision, information unavailable. Shadow's Servant, information unavailable. Soul Feast, information unavailable. Past hosts, Wolf, Frog. Current host, Merman. Locate the Great Sage to unlock skill information. Dark was disappointed that he didn't learn anything from this tab, but at least he knew that if he found the Great Sage, he could learn information. He was just about ready to leave for the village, but then he remembered his skill and decided he should progress to the next level. So before leaving, he thought, activate skill Soul Feast. A cloud of black smoke emerged from the unconscious wolf and the dead sidekick, and both clouds rushed into Dark's new body. He felt the souls touch his heart, and they were cold. Souls absorbed. Next level, 4 out of 10. He was a little confused why the soul of the unconscious wolf was taken, but he continued to town anyway. His walk was short. Only about 5 minutes had passed when he saw the village ahead of him. The city was small, with less than 25 buildings in total. The outer wall was heavily damaged during the siege done by the Kingdom of Darkness, and there were many holes in the tall wood. Dark approached the main gate, although if he wanted to sneak in, he could have throughout the numerous holes in the wall. Each hole had burnt wood around the edges, suggesting that many fire-based projectiles had been launched at the wall. At the main gate, 2 mermen with heavy metal armor and large swords were usually inspecting the various carts and people entering the city. Currently, there was nobody except Dark wishing to enter the city, so the 2 guards were lazily sitting in chairs. Dark approached them, and they stood up and puffed up their chests as if they respected Dark. "Hello, sir. Welcome to Osha, sir," one guard said to him. "What brings you to Osha, sir?" "I'm here to relax for a few days, and see the sights located around the city," Dark responded, deciding it was best not to tell them that he was hunting dangerous targets. The second guard said to Dark, "Sorry, sir, but we can't let you in without a name, sir." "I am Vincent," Dark said, knowing that he couldn't use Vic's name in case these two knew him. The guards looked at each other briefly and opened the gate and stepped inside. "Enjoy your stay, sir. If you need anything, you can ask us, sir." Dark walked inside and was amazed by the village's interior. Unlike the damaged wall, the village's buildings were fully repaired. The city was based around 3 main streets. You could only change between the 3 streets at the northern gate, the southern gate, or the central road. The middle street was filled with shops and amenities, with the higher cost shops on the left side of the road and the cheaper shops on the right side. The middle road was always very busy with carts and wagons, so switching between the left and right sides of the road was nearly impossible. The leftmost street had very large log cabin-style houses that had 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 stories, and a couple of fancy-looking inns. The rightmost street had very shabby log cabins, with only one full, and usually housed more than one family. This planning was built to enforce and emphasize the strict class system held by the mermen. Dark remembered why the guards at the gate called him Sir and let him in without any official documents. The mer people held very firmly to their traditions, and Dark had learned all about them at his school. A royal merman had red eyes, and they would be welcome in any establishment around all of the southern kingdom. A second-class merman would have yellow eyes and be welcome anywhere in Osha and almost anywhere in the southern kingdom, but they were still far below the royals. The last group was the third-class mermen, who would have blue eyes and would only be welcome in certain establishments in Osha. The royal and second-class mermen lived and worked on the left side of the city, while the third-class mermen lived on the right. Dark must have red eyes if he was allowed into the city so easily, and that made sense because looking at his arms, he realized he had black scales. So far, when Dark took control of the wolf, frog, or mermen, their appearances always changed to have black skin and red eyes. Dark decided it was likely a trait of his shadow servant skill, and went down the left side of the main road. As Dark walked down the road, heads turned to look at him, and he noticed that everyone on this side of the road had yellow eyes. This meant that they were all second-tier citizens, and that in theory, they would respect him. He looked at what buildings were built on this side of the road. He saw a weapons shop, a tavern, a few diners, a spa, and the thing he was looking for, a guild hall. A guild hall is a large room where adventurers gather to embark on quests, and Dark needs to find some party members to take into the cave. The guild hall looked very unique, with wooden walls, a doorway without a door, and a glass ceiling made in the pattern of merman scales. Dark entered the guild hall, and many heads turned to look at him. He could see many different mermen with different weapons, skin colors, clothes, and he could even see a few creatures that were not mermen. He approached the desk, where a short merwoman with red skin and yellow eyes bowed to him respectfully and asked in a slightly embarrassed voice, "How can I help you, sir?" "I need a party of experienced adventurers, including at least 1 medic and 1 mage." "We will put out a request right away, sir. How difficult is your mission?" Dark knew that his mission was difficult, as he was going to fight forces that could poison an entire river. As an adventurer, he was used to the normal system of difficulty, where a mission could be either beginning, intermediate, or professional difficulty. Since he was likely fighting against professional enemies, he responded by saying professional level difficulty. "I need the best of the best." "All right, we have everything ready, sir. If you would please take a seat in the private lounge, we will promptly send in our best adventurers." She didn't ask about a down payment, as it was considered rude to doubt the ability of someone to pay when they had a higher class than yours. "Thanks," Dark said, and walked through a set of doors to a private lounge. The lounge was about the size of the previous room, meaning that it was about the size of an average living room. The private lounge had one long stone table that could seat up to 15 people, and a little bar with drinks and snacks in the center of the table. Dark sat down at the head of the table on a little wooden chair, and waited patiently as 3 merpeople walked into the room and took the closest seats to him. They started introducing themselves, and Dark saw that they were all royals, because they were very laid back around him. One of them was wearing a full suit of metal armor, making it impossible to see his body or eyes. His armor shined brightly, and he carried a large, two-handed sword on his back. He spoke in a deep voice. "We are the three brothers of Osha, known as the guardians and best fighters in the village. We will be accompanying you on this mission. You may call me Back. I am the highest-ranking swordsman in the city, and I came second in the beta division of the Tournament of Flame." The Tournament of Flame was an annual tradition in the Kingdom of Fire, where all fighters from all nations were invited to test their skills against each other. The tournament had 3 categories: Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. The winner of each category got a prize, and the prize was best in the first category, Alpha. The winner of the Alpha category could choose any reward that they wanted, whilst the winner of the Beta and Gamma categories would be given a large amount of money and magical equipment. Dark had participated in the tourney only once when he was 15 years old as part of his school's training. He placed 25th in the Gamma category. He was truly impressed that Back had finished second, and he doubted that he could do the same, especially in the Beta category. The second merman had blue skin, but covered their entire face with a wooden mask. The mask was attached around her ears with string, and the mask had a rat's face painted on the front. The merman spoke, and to Dark's surprise, sounded the same as Back. "I am Rak. I am a mid-tier summoner, and can main up to 3 summons for a short time. Most summoners can only summon 2 creatures, but having 3 is impressive. However, what matters is the quality of the summon. If Rak can only summon the frogs, then he would still be next to useless in combat. But, as he was a brother of Back, Dark decided to trust him for now. The third brother wore a white cloak covering his entire body, and spoke with the same voice as the other brothers. "I am Lak, the holy guardian of Osha, and the best cleric in the Kingdom of Frost." Dark was not surprised if he was the only cleric in the kingdom, as merpeople usually used magic crystals to heal. Dark specifically requested for a healer because he didn't want someone to die because they couldn't use the crystal in time. He knew that any group needed a healer, and his fight against Vic was another example of that. Either way, now that he had his party, he was about ready to head into the cave. Backed interrupted his thought with his own question. "Now that you know who we are, who are you?" "I am Vincent, and I hired all of you to help me clear out a cave." "Clearing a cave shouldn't require a group like us," Rak said. "The cave is likely the most dangerous in the kingdom, and it has specific information that I need inside." This was partially true, but the information was in the form of a few strong people Dark planned to interrogate, then kill. The reward for their deaths would be more than enough to hire every adventurer in this city as full-time bodyguards. Or at least Dark thought so. Lak stood up, saying, "I would rather go now, if you don't mind." "Not at all," Dark said, and the 3 set off on their journey. Dark led the way, and just before he entered the cave, he heard one of the brothers call out to him. "Vincent, is this the cave we will be entering?" "Yes." "Do you know that citizens of the Kingdom of Darkness are rumored to be hiding in there?" "Yes." "Why do you want to enter that cave, then?" Dark turned around and faced the 3 brothers. "I want to conquer this cave because they are hiding in there," he said. The others thought that he was insane, but they didn't want to lose their pride, and decided that they could handle the challenge. They all walked into the cave. Chapter 4. The cave smelled of decomposing bodies, and the group stepped over the bodies of both the wolf and the frog when entering the cave. The brothers looked at each other, but said nothing. They went down through the pathway that Dark had already been in, and past the room where Dark woke up as a shadow. The room that Dark woke up in turned out to be the only room on the 2nd level, so the group went down a narrow corridor to the 3rd. The 3rd level was about twice as big as the 2nd, and in one corner there was a small den of frogs. There were about 10 frogs, including the one that Dark met earlier. The group noticed them, but didn't pay them much thought. The frog from earlier did not recognize Dark now that he was in a different host, so he hid in his den instead of approaching. The group went down to the 3rd level. The 3rd level was about the size of a log cabin. Mice scurried around the ground, and in one corner a few snakes were nested. The group tried to walk past them, but the snakes started slithering towards them. Back drew his sword. Dark saw that the blade was curved like a scimitar, but was long and heavy enough for Back to have to hold it with two hands. Back swung the blade, and in the blink of an eye, both snakes stopped moving. Dark was impressed, but he said nothing. He thought that the cave was very easy so far, but it would surely get harder soon. They took a narrow stairway down to the 4th floor, and there was a message written on the walls of the stairway. The message said, "Those who are not our Almighty Lord will perish by these 2 trials." Dark looked at the group and said, "Looks like we are getting closer." "Yes, we should only have 2 floors left before the real fight begins," Rack responded. They finished going down the stairwell and entered the 4th floor. The 4th floor was about the size of a football field, and unlike the normal conditions of the normal weather of the previous floors, this floor was very cold. The ceiling of the cave couldn't be seen, and instead it looked like a gray cloud loomed above the party. Even though they were underground, it was snowing. Snow covered the ground, and the party shivered subconsciously. They would have to clear this floor quickly. In the snow, there were a few hundred balls of ice. The balls looked as if they were carved out by a master who spent their life carving to reach such perfect spheres. They were carved out. Then, the balls moved. The balls of ice stood up, and Dark realized that they were golems. Golems usually lived atop mountains and were made of stone. They are very strong and cannot be damaged by magic. These golems were still immune to magic, but since they were made out of ice, they were a bit easier to defeat. The golems grew feet made of ice too, and started approaching the party. Dark and Back drew their swords, but before the golems reached them, Rack started chanting a summoning spell. On the ground below them, the snow melted, leaving a pool of water. The water floated into the sky and started spinning, making a wheel shape. Rack had created a portal. Out of the portal, a human-sized green snake exited, followed by another red snake. They looked like merfolk, but instead of scales, they had slippery skin like leather, and sharp teeth hung from their mouths. Rack said to Dark, "These are the Naga. They obey my command. They can use water magic and have powerful bite. They should support you nicely while you slay these guys." The Nagas summoned water out of thin air and shot the water at each golem in the shape of bullets. The water bullets could not damage the golems because golems are immune to magic, but they were strong enough to launch the golems back to the end of the room. This forced the golems to attack Dark and Back one at a time, allowing the 2 to fight easily. Dark drew his sword and started stabbing at the golem in front of him. His sword could not even damage them. Back, on the other hand, was cutting through the golems like they were butter. Lack casted some form of spell on Dark, and Dark felt his arms getting stronger. He struck again at the golem next to him, and it shattered. The Nagas held back every golem except for 2, allowing Back and Dark to kill them, then stopped holding back another 2. The party repeated the cycle until all of the golems were destroyed. As soon as Dark cut through the last golem, he heard a girl's voice yell, "Floor 1 cleared." The snow on the ground disappeared, and it stopped snowing. This allowed the party to group up and discuss their next moves. Rack said a little chant, and the Nagas disappeared into smoke. "What should we do now?" Lack asked. "Do you want to finish the 2nd floor?" "With how easy this one was, I think we should," Back responded. "I agree," Dark said. "We came all this way, we might as well get rewarded for our efforts." "Looks like we are in agreement then," Rack said. The 3 rested for a few seconds and prepared to enter the last floor. Dark remembered that he should use his soul feast skill, so he waited until the 3 brothers were not looking at him and activated it. The souls of the ice golems were sucked into him, and he could feel himself grow much stronger than before. Souls absorbed. Next level, 100 out of 100. Next level reached. Contact the Great Sage for more information. Final level. Great Stones, 0 out of 4. Again, Dark had to find this Great Sage person. he decided that he should hunt for them after he finished his current mission. He had leveled up, too. What did that mean? He had never leveled up, nor heard of anyone who did. Maybe he had to reach the final level to experience the real results. Or maybe the great sage could tell him what leveling up did. Either way, he should find these great stones. He sighed. His list of objectives had gotten very long. He had to finish the second floor of this cave, defeat the citizens of the Kingdom of Darkness, turn them over to the Southern Kingdom for a reward, find the great sage, find the great stones, and only then could he kill that blasted goddess. The three brothers heard him sigh, and Lack asked what was wrong. He responded by asking, "Do you know what the great stones are?" Lack looked surprised. How do you know about them?" "I don't know anything about them. That's why I asked." "Most people don't even know that the great stones exist. How do you?" Dark knew that telling him the truth would certainly confuse him, so he lied and said that a friend mentioned them once. This was apparently the right answer, because Lack shared information with Dark. "The 4 great stones are 4 powerful artifacts that are currently in the possession of different kingdoms. This kingdom, along with the kingdom of darkness, stone, and fire, all possess one. The stones are very powerful, and all have different effects. I am actually the wielder of the stone owned by the Frost Kingdom." He opened his hood a little and showed that he was wearing a necklace with a large blue gem in the middle. "This stone is specialized in healing magic, and allows me to heal almost anything indefinitely." Dark wanted the stone, but knew that there was no way he could defeat these 3 in combat, and even if he did, the Southern Kingdom would hunt him down. He would think of a plan to get the stone later. Perhaps he would buy it. Now is the time to defeat the second trial. The party found a little stairway downwards and took the stairs to the next floor. As they walked down the stairs, they could feel it get hotter and hotter and hotter. By the time they reached the base of the stairs, it was over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. They walked out into the second level, and it was a 50-yard cube. Just as the room before, the sky seemed to stretch upwards infinitely. In the center of the room, a dragon was sleeping. The dragon had red scales the size of Dark's head, and a head larger than a building. Dragons had wings bigger than any other creature on the planet. Dark had heard about dragons, but never faced one in combat before. They were said to be immune to non-magical damage. Dark thought that clearly whoever had created this dungeon was very intelligent. They purposely made both floors complete opposites, so that no matter what skills a party had, they would always be weak to one of the room's enemies. Dark could not spend much time thinking about how great the creator of this dungeon was, because he had to think of a way to defeat this dragon. He knew that dragons were very good with magic, and that Back likely couldn't even damage him. Dark could damage the dragon with his sword beam, Rack could damage him with his nagas, and Lack likely had some spells Dark didn't know about. "Hey, Lack," Dark whispered. "What spells do you know?" "I know Smite, Sharpen, and the spell from the Great Stone, Infinite Heal. I'm sure you know what the others do, but Infinite Heal allows me to continuously heal up to 2 targets for a full minute. That means for 1 minute, they can't die. After using the skill, I pass out for a few hours, though," Lack responded. Smite was a magical spell that dealt damage to an evil creature, and Sharpened simply made a blade sharper. Sharpened didn't allow a normal blade to hit things that were resistant to physical attacks, and dragons were not evil creatures, so those 2 were useless for this fight. "Back, do you have any magical abilities? Can Back summon anything but nagas?" Dark asked Back. "I can use Berserker's Morale. It's a skill that makes enemies think I do more damage to them, but besides that, I only have physically damaging spells. Pack can only summon up to 3 nagas for a little bit, but he can combine them into one singular naga that's really big," Back replied to him. "One last thing," Dark continued. "Back, can you cast that Berserker's Morale on another target?" "Yes. Why?" "Because I have the perfect plan." Dark explained his plan to the others, and they got to work. The dragon woke up from a loud thump, followed by the sounds of hissing. The dragon stood up, and much to Dark's surprise, bellowed Who dares disturb my sleep? Dark didn't know that dragons could talk, but this would help him a lot. Pack had summoned 3 Nagas and combined them into one. The Naga was almost as big as the dragon and had a golden staff in its right hand. Back casted Berserker's Morale on the Naga, and when it shot a jet of water at the dragon thought that he had lost half of a leg. Dark was sitting on the Naga's shoulder, and while the jet of water hit the dragon, he yelled, "Your time has ended. Flee before the power of a god," as loud as he could. The dragon was definitely shocked, but wasn't convinced. The dragon shot flame out of his mouth, and the flame would have definitely killed both Dark and the Naga if Lack hadn't casted Infinite Heal on them right before the fire hit them. When the mighty Naga emerged from the flames unscathed, the dragon began to worry. The Naga launched another harmless stream of water at the dragon, but because of the Berserker's Morale spell, the dragon felt as if it had lost 2 of its 4 legs. The dragon flew directly towards the Naga and tried to cut its head off. The dragon sighed in relief after he saw the Naga's head detach from its body. But when the dragon felt a jet of water hit him in the neck, he thought he was about to die. He quickly turned around and was shocked to see that the Naga he had killed had its head firmly reattached to its neck. The dragon thought that he was about to die, and he had no hope against the Naga that was uninjured after both a physical and magical attack. To finish the dragon, Dark yelled, "Your fighting was commendable. If you leave now, I will spare your life." "Thank you," the dragon replied in a deep and slow voice. The dragon knew that he couldn't possibly win against a creature that's impervious to both physical and magical attacks, and he likely wouldn't survive another hit. "I will leave at once, O Great One," the dragon continued. The dragon flew into the sky and disappeared from the group's sight. The Naga also started disappearing, so Dark jumped down to the ground and regrouped with his companions. Lack was unconscious as he was exhausted after casting his best skill, and Pack could barely stand after the effort he put into summoning the huge Naga. Pack was fine, but that was expected from a master like him. Since they had cleared the final trial, the next room should be a reward for them. It was still very hot in this room, so when a wall shifted and a staircase leading down appeared, they decided it was best to go downwards. The next room was likely to be filled with treasure, and they could wait there for Lack to wake up. Pack lifted up Lack effortlessly, and Dark held Pack around the shoulder to help him walk. They made their way over to and down the stairs. When they exited the stairway, they saw a light that looked as bright as the sun. It wasn't the sun. It was a mountain of gold coins, the currency used all around the continent. There was enough gold for the 4 of them to retire and feed their families for generations. Back put Lack gently on the ground and looked at Dark eerily. As the leader, Dark was expected to divvy up the treasure in a fair way. Dark knew that if he didn't split it fairly, he could very well be killed. He let Pack down so that he could rest, and started to inspect the mountain of gold. There were at least 1,000 coins, but Dark noticed something. Some of the coins were red. He called to Back. "Back, have you heard of red coins?" "Red coins. Coins are bronze, silver, or gold. Never red." Dark already knew this. "There are red coins in this pile." "Let me see." Back walked over to the pile, and Dark took out one of the red coins and showed it to him. Golden coins usually said gold on the front and had the logo of the Merchants Guild on the back. The Merchants Guild was a unification of the 5 nations' richest members who worked together to create a common currency. The guild was created thousands of years ago, and now making money was their only job. They stamped their logo, a horse-drawn wagon, on every coin they created. The red coin did not have their logo on it. The coin had the number 7 on the front and the letter A on the back. Back turned to Dark. "What are these?" Dark thought for a while, and finally thought of the answer. These might spell out a message. "How?" Back asked. "We just need to find all the coins in this pile, and then put them in order based on the number on the back. Dark answered him. That's a fantastic idea, Back explained, and the two of them eagerly dug through the pile to find the coins. By the time Lack and Pack were rested, they had already found the secret message. They lined up all 77 red coins in order and got the secret message. The coin spelled out, "The great sage will serve the shadow. Travel to the underworld, and your power will be unlocked." When Dark read it for the first time, he was scared. Would he have to die to meet the great sage? That would be impossible. How would he reach the underworld? Nobody even knew if the underworld existed. How could he get there? He knew that to reach the underworld, it was rumored that you would have to die and travel down the river Styx. But how could he find the river? He had many questions. But suddenly, an idea. He had a strong hunch that he knew where he had to go to find the great sage. The first part of the message still puzzled him. Was he the shadow? When he got reincarnated, he did look like a shadow, and his skills gave him the shadow's abilities. If he was the shadow, then he wanted to meet the great sage as soon as possible, and he had a good guess as to where they were. He said to the group, "You may keep as much of this as you can carry on you. I will return later and take the rest." "What?" Back asked. "That's a huge amount of money." "You can have it. See you later," Dark called, already walking back up the stairs to the floor where the dragon lived. Dark walked up through the cave. He passed the ice floor, the snake floor, and the frog's floor before exiting the cave. He didn't know how far behind the others were, but he didn't really care. He knew where he had to go. In mythology, the river Styx took souls to the underworld if they rowed a boat, and touching the water would be lethal. The river outside of the cave would kill creatures when they fell in, so Dark assumed that the river is how he would reach the underworld. He walked out of the cave, stood at the bank of the river, and jumped in with a splash. Chapter 5. Dark did not fall through the green ooze that was previously in the river. He instead fell through a purple portal which had replaced the ooze the second he jumped in. He traveled straight through the portal and landed on a throne. He was in a large throne room with a high ceiling and a golden chandelier looming above the room. The walls were lined with banners, all of them identical. The banners were all black, with two red eyes in the middle. Dark thought that he was sitting on a normal throne, but when he looked down, he realized that it was made of bones. In front of him, 3 figures were kneeling, wearing black, dark robes, making it impossible for Dark to see them. "The Almighty One has arrived. Our Lord is here," said the first one on the right. He spoke in a voice deeper than Back, and his voice forced fear into Dark. He knew that he could easily kill Dark if he tried. "Where am I?" Dark asked. "You are safe here. This is your palace," the voice responded. "Who are you 3? Dark asked. The cloaked figure stood up and took off his cloak. Underneath the cloak was a man-shaped robot with a slick, modern design. He had a glossy white coat of paint on his body, and he had bulky limbs, obviously concealing weapons. "I am a robot from the Eastern Kingdom. I live to serve the shadow and carry out your will. I am called Armageddon." The figure on the left stood up next and took off her cloak's hood. She was a demon. Her skin was pure black, and she had purple glowing horns on her head. Dark almost instinctively reached for his sword, but stopped himself. She had a belt of potions slung over her shoulder. The potions were red, green, purple, and some were even glowing with textures Dark had never seen before. She spoke in a thick accent. "I am an alchemist from the kingdom of darkness. My potions can melt enemies in an instant or empower an ally with strength that most have never seen before. My name is Letitia, and I will serve you well, my lord." Dark was confused as to why they were all talking about serving him. He didn't think he was that special. The third figure stood up. She took off her cloak, and she was wearing a black witch's hat. She wore a normal shirt that said "Spells are fun" on it, and a black skirt. She was about 20 years old. She spoke in a friendly and casual voice. "Hiya, I'm Angeline. You can call me Angie. I was the best witch in the Kingdom of Darkness, and I'm the one who enchanted the river. I'll help you every step of the way, so let's have fun. Alright, you know me better by the boring name I was given for being a great prophet, the Great Sage. It's a really formal name, so I prefer Angie. I'll teach you all how to fight better and use your skills. This is going to be so much fun." Dark was very cautious when talking to her. She sounded nice, but with only a second's glance, he could tell that she was capable of single-handedly capturing the Southern Kingdom. Dark had many questions still. He started by asking, "Where am I?" To which Angeline responded with, "We're in the Southern Kingdom still. We're just by the border in a big mansion. We have mansions set up all around the continent, and there are 3 more people waiting for you in those houses. You were lucky we found you, because now I can start your training today." "What training?" Their conversation continued. "Haven't you opened your status menu? I'll help you unlock some more of your shadow skills and teach you what they all do." "Why did you all say you would follow me?" "We all do it for different reasons. I'm doing it for fun. You don't have to worry about our loyalty, though. We can forge a shadow contract." "A shadow contract?" "It's one of your shadow skills. Basically, they are normal contracts that are unbreakable." "How do I make one?" Dark was getting more and more confused by this conversation. But Angeline was quite happy. "Yay! It's time for our first lesson." Angeline was clearly excited, and she started walking out of the throne room. She called over her shoulder for Dark to follow her, and he did. The other 2 bowed to Dark as he walked by. Dark followed Angeline into a massive library, with golden bookshelves going all the way up to the ceiling. The library was in a circle shape, and there were 2 exits from the room besides the entrance Dark came from. In the middle of the room there was a table, and Angeline sat down at one of the 2 chairs. "Take a seat," she said excitedly, and Dark slowly sat down in the chair opposite to her. "To form a shadow contract, you first have to go into your normal form." Dark was puzzled. Didn't he just jump from host to host? "What is my normal form?" he asked her. "The form you were in before you took control of your first creature," she replied simply, but Dark was still confused. He asked her, "The cocoon-shaped shadow?" "Well, you did level up since then, so your form changed a little. All you have to do is think, 'Release the host,' and you will go back to your normal form." Dark thought those words in his head. Host released. Dark could feel as the merman disappeared. To where, he didn't know. He was left in his original form, but last time he was in this form, he could only see through the eyes of the frog. But now he could see normally. He asked Angeline, "How can I see through my own eyes? I thought I could only see through the eyes of others?" "That was your shadow's vision skill, but since you changed form, you can just see without it now. Shadow's vision will simply help your senses when you activate it now. Here's a mirror so you can see your new form." She reached into thin air, and poof, a mirror appeared in her hand. She gave it to Dark, and he saw himself. His body had the same shape as when he was a paladin, but instead of skin and a body, he was made of a thick black mist, similar to a shadow. It seemed that he was once a cocoon, and had now hatched into a human-like form. He asked Angeline, "What will I become next?" "Next?" She looked confused. "After I get the 4 great stones." I don't know. I know you'll get stronger, but I can't tell you if or how your form will change. Don't worry, though. Soon you'll be able to choose your appearance." Dark was interested more by the fact that she didn't know something about him than by the information that he could change his appearance. So she doesn't know everything about me. All of these questions were just beating around the bush, so he asked the real question on his mind. "Are you the one who writes the messages when I change form and unlock new skills?" She looked puzzled. "No. You get messages when you unlock new skills?" She didn't say any more, and this left more questions in Dark's mind. Most importantly, he wondered who was writing the messages, and who let him choose between light and dark. For now, he pushed the thoughts aside and focused himself on his current learning. If he wanted to defeat the goddess, gaining abilities was a must. Angeline continued. "Now that you are in shadow form, to form a contract, you only need to sign the paper, then channel some dark power into it." She held up a piece of paper and put it on the table. Dark read the contract. The paper had written on it, in red ink, I, Angie, the great sage, will serve and obey every command of the shadow before me until the end of time. Signed, Angie. Signed, blank. Dark needed to put his name on the line, but before doing so, he asked Angie, Are you sure you want to sign this? This seems pretty serious. Angeline puffed off her cheeks like a child. Of course I'm sure. I wouldn't sign it if I wasn't. How dumb do you think I am? Dark could tell that she was getting frustrated, so he signed the paper and tried channeling energy into it. Nothing happened. He didn't know how. Angeline looked at him. You know how to move your energy a little, right? Dark remembered the time in the cave where he made himself legs and arms, only for them to disappear when he lost focus, and nodded. Angeline cheered up a little. Good. Just do that with the paper. Dark tried again, this time pushing dark energy from his fingers into the paper. He touched the paper, and purple fire spread from the spot he touched it to the rest of the page, slowly burning it. Well done, Lord, Angeline said to him. Do you want to go make contracts with Army and Letty? Dark assumed she meant Armageddon and Laetitia. He nodded, and Angeline called out into the throne room. Army, Letty. A few seconds later, the two walked in, obviously annoyed by the names Angeline gave them. Angeline pulled 2 pieces of paper out of a portal and gave one to each of them. They handed the papers to Dark. One said, I, Armageddon, will serve the shadow until the end of time. And the other said, on behalf of the demons, I, Laetitia, promise to serve and follow the shadow until the end of time. Dark asked the two why they were so willing to serve him. Serving the shadow is the goal I was given upon creation. There is nothing that could give me more happiness. Armageddon replied. Dark asked who he was created by, and Armageddon said that he did not know. Dark signed the paper and put energy to it. Again, the paper slowly burned, and while it burned, he asked Laetitia why she was willing to serve him. Serving the shadow is the greatest honor among the demon race. Dark accepted her answer and signed the paper. While it burned, he turned to Angeline and asked her, Didn't you say that there were 3 others around the continent? Order them all to come here. They're already coming, she replied, and closed her eyes. She opened them a few seconds later and said, They will be here in about a week. Dark realized that he was tired after making the 3 contracts. Angeline told him it was normal to feel tired, and that he would soon gain enough strength to forge contracts without using energy. She led him out of the library and down a long corridor with 3 rooms on the left side and 3 rooms on the right side, all numbered. At the end of the hallway, there was another room labeled 1. We all sleep in these 6 rooms on the sides, and your room is at the head of the hallway. She pointed at the first room on the right, labeled 2, and said, I'll be sleeping in that room, so shout if you need anything. Army and Letty sleep in rooms 6 and 5, so you can call them 2. Thank you, Dark said, and opened the door to his room. Angeline had already gone into her room, so Dark entered his. His canopy bed was bigger than a king's, and had massive purple curtains on the sides. He had 10 pillows on the bed and white sheets. The room had large windows, covered by similar purple curtains. He had another door leading to a huge bathroom with marble countertops and a large bathtub. On the left and right walls there were huge cabinets. Dark discovered that both cabinets were walk-in closets, the left one containing clothes, while the right one contained weapons. He wondered if he would ever need the 15 swords of different sizes in the cabinet, and decided that 1 would likely be enough. He pushed aside the curtains to one of the windows and looked outside. He could still see the river that he fell in, but he was very far downstream. It looked like this entire place was built into a mountain, and from here he could see the tops of the tall trees. He could see some birds in the trees that he had never seen before. It was nighttime, and Dark was surprised how fast time had flown by. The entire room was lit, but Dark couldn't tell what it was lit by. When he simply wished that it was a little darker, the lights turned off. He went to bed and fell asleep almost instantly. When Dark woke up, he was looking straight at Armageddon. He jumped up with a small shriek, and Armageddon stepped back sharply. Forgive me, my lord, but we have a gift for you. Dark was still half asleep, so he told Armageddon to wait outside his room. The robot slowly left, and Dark got out of bed. He realized that he wasn't wearing any clothes since he went into shadow form. He got out of bed, slightly embarrassed, and walked over to the closet full of clothes. The clothes were different from what he normally wore. None of them were white and yellow like a paladin's uniform. These clothes were mostly black and purple. He looked past dark robes and black cloaks and put on a black t-shirt and black shorts. He went to the bathroom and was about to wonder where his toothbrush was so he could brush his teeth, then realized he didn't have teeth. He left his room and Armageddon was waiting for him. "Please follow me, my lord," he said. After a short nod from Dark, he walked down the corridor, past the library, through the throne room, and into a circle-shaped room. The room was empty, but had 5 exits going in different directions. Armageddon walked through the second exit from the left, and they came into a dining area. Angelina and Laetitia were sitting on the left and right sides of the 7-seat table. Armageddon pointed to the seat at the head of the table, then sat down at the second chair on the left. Dark sat down at the head of the table, and Laetitia explained that they usually sat in order of prestige, but when the others were absent, they sat closest to the head. Angelina was almost done eating her bacon and eggs, while Laetitia was finished with her breakfast. Dark and Armageddon both did not need to eat. Angelina turned to Dark and stopped eating. She reached into a portal and took out a small blue gem about the size of her palm, and carefully held it up so Dark could see. "This is the Great Stone of Water. Surprise!" she said. "How did you get this? Doesn't this belong to the 3 merman brothers?" Dark asked. "Well, it used to, but they weren't as tough as they looked. Laetitia poisoned them and they fell unconscious," Armageddon responded. Dark was conflicted. He obviously needed the stone, but he felt guilty for hunting his past party. "Where are they now?" Dark asked Laetitia. "They are tied up in the training grounds," she responded. Dark wanted to order them to set the brothers free, but then he thought of something. He wanted to know how strong his new subordinates really were, and he had long passed the point where he cared deeply about others' lives. "You said you normally sit according to prestige. How is that measured?" "Prestige is measured based on combat ability." "What are your numbers?" Dark asked. This time, Angelina responded happily. "I am number 2, only behind you. Army is 6, and Letty is 5. We agreed they should guard this house with me, because we thought you were likely to be here." Dark thought about it, and decided testing the power of this group was quite important to him. "All right," Dark ordered. "Let's go visit them in the training grounds." Angelina lead the way. "Okay, master, but call me Angie," Angelina said, sprinting up from her chair. "Follow me." The 4 of them walked out of the dining area and into the circular room. This time they went through the first door from the left, and Dark realized that they were outside. On top of the mountain, a large arena had been built. The arena reminded Dark of an outdoor sumo wrestling ring, but it was much bigger. The 3 brothers were locked in a large cage to the side of the arena. "Laetitia, can you heal them?" "Certainly, my lord." She walked over to the cage, opened it, and splashed the 3 with a little potion. Dark approached the 3 and saw that they looked healthy but unhappy. Dark spoke to them and said, "You 3 can all work together to defeat Armageddon over here." He pointed at him. "And if you can't, I'll let you go free. Keep in mind that if you try to run, you will die." The 3 brothers didn't say anything, but in their heads they were certain that they would be free in minutes. How strong could a single robot be? Dark was planning on sending in Laetitia if Armageddon died, and if push came to shove, he was confident in Angelina's abilities to defeat them at least. Dark walked over to the others and spoke. "Angelina, do you think Armageddon can kill them?" "Call me Angie, and there isn't a doubt in my mind." Dark could tell, as the brothers and Armageddon entered the ring, that both sides thought their victory was assured. Dark personally thought that they had roughly equal skill, but only because Pack and Lack would hold back from using his best skills. A swordsman has many skills that can cause explosions and similar effects, but Back wouldn't use them with his brothers around. Back did get second place in the Tournament of Flames Beta Division, so he was certainly very strong. Dark, Angie, and Laetitia sat down on a bench facing the arena, and Dark counted down to the start of the fight. 3. Back drew his sword. Armageddon did nothing. 2. Pack opened portals so his Nagas could exit as soon as the match started. Armageddon did nothing. 1. Lack started chanting so he could cast a buff spell right as the timer hit 0. Armageddon did nothing. Go! In less than a second, Armageddon raised one hand, and just before the Nagas could leave their portals, Dark heard a boom. 3 small pieces of metal left Armageddon's left arm, and the 3 pieces hit the brothers, 1 in each chest. The 3 brothers fell to the ground with a synchronized thump. Dark's jaw dropped. What was that? He asked nobody in particular. That was a weapon created in the Western Kingdom. It fires small bits of metal at a fast speed. The models programmed into me were made better than any others, Armageddon replied. There's another guy who uses weapons like those, Angie said. He'll be here soon enough. Dark was, again, conflicted, which he found himself a lot these days. He was happy that his new allies were definitely among the 1%, but for a person to just die that easily, could he live with that? He remembered how he himself died, from a weapon that he didn't even see, and the conflict inside him vanished. This is a good thing. The stronger my friends, the easier it will be for me to kill that corrupt goddess, he thought to himself. One thing is for sure. I am not stronger than Armageddon right now, and if he is only number 6, then I need to get stronger. Fast. He turned to Angie and asked her to help him. Can you make me stronger quickly? That's the spirit. Of course I can. But first, here's the great stone. Dark took the blue gem from her. Just as he wondered what he was supposed to do with it, the gem slowly melted into his skin. Final level. Great stones, 1 out of 4. One last thing before we get to training, Dark asked Angie. How do I get the other 3 great stones? Well, the Stone of Darkness is already in our possession, so I can give it to you now. She handed him the stone out of a portal, and it melted into his shadowy body. Final level. Great stones, 2 out of 4. She continued her explanation. Both the Kingdom of Fire and the Kingdom of Stone have great stones that we can't easily get. Luckily, the Tournament of Flame is coming soon, so if you win, you can just request the Great Stone of Fire as your prize. Dark liked the idea. He could get the stone without making any enemies. The tournament would start in about 5 months, so Dark had plenty of time to train. He spent the rest of the day learning how to better control his energy to change his appearance. For the next few days, he would wake up, train until he could barely walk, go to sleep, and repeat the cycle again the next day. He didn't eat or relax simply because he didn't have to, and he was focused on getting stronger. 4 days later, the other 3 arrived. It happened while Dark was training in the arena on top of the palace. In the distance, he saw what looked like a white snake, but it was flying. The white snake was slowly approaching, and Dark pointed it out to Angie. Wow, they got here fast. That dragon has been flying here non-stop for the past 4 days or so. Don't worry, more of your subordinates are on there, Dark explained to him. Dark watched as the snake slowly got closer, and as it came closer, he noticed that it had rows of white wings that blended in with its skin. The dragon landed near Dark and bowed its head, almost as if it too was loyal to the shadow. A girl hopped off the back of the dragon. Angie? She looked almost the same as Angie, but she was wearing white clothes instead of black clothes like Angie. When she spoke, her voice was the same as Angie's. Hi, Lord Dark, or do you prefer Dark Lord? My name is Develica, but call me Devi. She was seeming more like Angie by the second. She could obviously tell what Dark was thinking, so she said, I'm Angie's sister, but don't worry, I am way cooler than her. Angie butted in and yelled, No, you're not. I'm way cooler. Dark raised his hands, and the two stopped talking. Dark was not yet used to being in charge, but he decided that he would act more respectable. Devi reached into a portal and pulled out a contract. She handed the contract to Dark. The contract said, I, Devi, the perfect prophet, will serve and obey every command of the shadow before me until the end of time. Angie saw the contract and sharply turned to Devi. You can't do this. Your contract is the exact same as mine. What kind of name is the perfect prophet? Nobody even calls you that. Stop copying me. Devi responded by saying, the contract will still work, so what does it matter what's written on it? And the perfect prophet is a way better name than the great sage. Right, Lord Dark? Don't be ridiculous. Our Lord is smart. There is no way he thinks the perfect prophet is a good name. Both girls turned to Dark, waiting for him to make a decision. Dark had already signed the contract, and it had finished burning, so he walked past the girls to the other person who arrived via the dragon. The man who arrived via the dragon was wearing a black hooded cowl, covering all parts of his head except for his blue eyes. The man spoke. I am a ninja from the Western Kingdom. My skill with both their blades and guns is unparalleled. Dark asked him what guns were, and the man explained that they were the bullet propulsion systems that Armageddon used. Dark asked the man to explain more, and they walked to the dining area as they talked. The man spent the rest of the afternoon explaining the inner workings of guns and the different types that had been created in the Eastern Kingdom. The girls had followed them and regretted it immensely. They struggled to stay awake while Dark gave his full focus to the ninja before him. At the end of the explanation, the ninja told Dark that his name was Regan and handed Dark a contract. Dark signed it, and while it burned, he realized that it was already late into the night. He decided to go to sleep. As he started to stand up from his chair, he noticed the girls and asked them why they had stayed up while the others had gone to sleep. You didn't answer us yet. Who has the better nickname? Dark wondered if they really cared about his opinion that much, and decided not to give them more reason to argue with each other. I don't think either nickname fits you two. I haven't seen either of you do any fortune-telling. Devi seemed surprised by this statement. Didn't Angie tell you why we decided to follow you? Yes, she told me that it was for fun. Angie started to squirm in her seat while Devi smiled. That's only partially true. You see, we are the best prophets on the continent, and we can see almost every aspect of the future. There is only one thing that neither of us can see. And that is? Dark was curious now. Your future, Angie replied. Dark wished they could predict his future, so he could learn the quickest way to kill the goddess. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to take a shortcut and follow their fortunes, but he didn't mind that. He would kill that goddess for sure. But for now, he went to sleep. He told them they could continue the conversation in the morning, and went to bed. Chapter 6. When Dark woke up, his seventh disciple had arrived. Dark woke up and went to the dining area. He never ate, but he usually met Angie there before training. On his way there, he bumped into something. He didn't see what he bumped into. To him, it looked like he bumped into thin air. Then he heard a voice in front of him. Sorry, Mr. Shadow. I'm Layton. I'm usually invisible, but if I try really hard, I can help you see me. Dark watched as slowly Layton appeared. He was not a human, like Dark had assumed. When he appeared, he looked transparent. He was made of a thin mist, similar to how Dark was made out of a dark black smoke. He looked younger than Dark, maybe about 14 years old. Layton faded back into invisibility only a few seconds after he appeared, saying that he didn't have the stamina to keep himself visible for more than a few seconds. Layton held Dark's hand, and they walked together to the dining area. When they arrived, everyone was already seated at their respective chairs. Dark took his seat at the head of the table, and Layton took his seat at the furthest chair on the left side. Dark could now see everyone's numbers based on where they were sitting. Angie and Devi were sitting in seats 2 and 3, Regan was sitting in seat 4, Letitia was sitting in the 5th seat, and Armageddon sat in the 6th. Finally, Layton sat in the 7th. Nobody was eating, so Dark assumed they were going to talk about Layton. Layton said that he was invisible, since he could remember, but that he heard Dark could help him. How can I help you? Dark asked Layton. I heard that one of your shadow skills, you can make me visible again, Layton replied. Is that possible? Dark asked Angie. It's very simple. You simply have to inject some of your dark energy into him. Then he will be able to make himself visible for longer periods of time. That skill is called Shadow's Service. It allows you to strengthen anyone or anything around you. Dark walked over to Layton and put his hand on Layton's head. Dark tried to channel his energy into Layton just as he did with the contract, and it worked. Layton slowly materialized as a boy, made of water. Dark was surprised by this development, but Layton was overjoyed. Finally, I can see myself. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. This is the best thing that ever happened to me. Here's my contract. You've done more for me than anyone else. I would be happy to help you any way I can. Dark had heard stories about people made of water and fire. He knew that they could travel very quickly and almost teleport by turning into water and flowing down a stream. He wanted an ally who could travel quickly, so even though he was taking a child's life away from him, and forcing the child to serve him, he signed the contract and burned it without hesitation. He had a thought, and turned to Layton again. "Can you still turn invisible?" Dark asked him. "Let me try quickly." Layton slowly faded away from existence, then reappeared slowly. "Yes, I can." Dark looked around at the people sitting at the table. There were 2 witches, a robot, a ninja, an alchemist, and a boy who could turn invisible. They were all unique. It was almost as if something, or someone, wanted him to make friends with the most diverse cast of characters they could imagine. But why? Dark thought for a while, and realized that he could learn from all of them. He had spent all of his time learning his shadow skills, but what if training himself physically was just as important? He thought it would be worth trying. "I have an idea," he declared to the room. "We will have a contest. I will spend 24 hours being trained by each of you. You may use whatever methods you deem to be most effective, and by the end of the week, whoever helps me the most will continue to train me until the Tournament of Flame." "Question," Angie said. Dark allowed her to speak, and she continued. "Can 2 of us team up and train you together? And if so, can we have 48 hours? "I don't see why not. If it will be more effective, then yes, 2 or more of you can team up and pool your time." "Thanks, Lord." "Who would like to go first?" Armageddon raised his fist, so Dark decided that he would train under him for today. The rest of the people of the table left, and Dark followed Armageddon to the training room. Armageddon had a very simple routine. He would shoot bullets at Dark in different patterns and speeds, and Dark would try to dodge them. They started out with bullets that were barely propelled, traveling a little faster than a ball, and worked their way up to bullets being propelled faster than 200 miles per hour. They got that far quickly, but past that point, progress was slow. Metal bullets would go straight through Dark, and sometimes he couldn't tell if he dodged them or not. But by the end of the day, Dark could tell that he made some improvement in his speed. The next day, he trained under Regan. For the first half of the day, Dark fought against Regan with a katana. Dark was very outmatched, but he learned a few techniques and could dodge about 2 strikes before getting hit. When Regan hit Dark, the sword didn't hurt him. The blade went through him in the same way that the bullets did. After noon, Regan told Dark to follow him. They walked through the house and into another room where cardboard cutouts in the shape of humans were hanging from the ceiling. Regan gave Dark a small handgun and instructed him to hit the targets. When Dark pulled the trigger, a bullet whooshed out of the barrel and hit the ground. Regan taught Dark how to aim, fire, and reload his gun. They practiced for hours, and Dark didn't even realize that he had been aiming and firing the gun for 10 hours. Eventually, though, his time with Regan ended, and he went to sleep. The next lesson was from Layton, who wanted to enhance Dark's senses. Layton led Dark into the library, instructed Dark to find him, and turned invisible. Dark spent 30 minutes searching around the room by touching everything before him, but couldn't find Layton. He decided to activate his Shadow's Vision skill because Angie told him earlier that it would help his senses. When he activated it, it was like he had another sense. It was hard to describe, but he could simply know that things were in front of him. He used this new skill to search the room, and he sensed that Layton had simply been walking in circles. "Well done," Layton said. "Angie told me about this skill, so I thought I would help you master it. The more you use it, the better it becomes. I'm going to hide in the dining hall, but you need to find me where I am. You need to find where I am before you enter the room." Dark wanted to ask how he's supposed to do that, but Layton had already disappeared. Dark walked into the circular room before the dining hall and stood there. He activated his Shadow's Vision skill and slowly searched the room. The longer he searched, the more of the room he could see at once. 3 hours had passed before he found Layton, and when he yelled, "Found you!" Layton walked out of the room happily. For the rest of the day, Layton would hide in a random spot in the house, and Dark would try to find him while sitting in one room. Dark could not find Layton again, and Layton told Dark that they could work on it more later. Dark was curious and wanted to grow his sixth sense further, but after a short nap, he went to Letitia's training. Letitia laid him underground into a small cellar filled with potions, and instructed him to drink one. Dark did as he was asked, but after drinking the potion, he felt as if he was being stung by 1,000 bees. He could barely manage the pain, but somehow he endured. He couldn't move, but after a few minutes, the pain diminished, and he could walk again. What was that?" he asked, gasping for breath. "That's a paralysis potion mixed with a pain potion, causing pain," The more you drink, the sooner you will be able to resist pain. Dark figured out what she meant. He would be drinking potions that caused him pain until he grew accustomed to the effects and didn't feel it anymore. It was a crude method of practice, but could it be effective? She gave him another potion, and he reluctantly drank it. While he had held back screams, she mixed more potions, and eventually he drank so much that he couldn't move his mouth anymore. When that happened, she started pouring potions into his mouth for him. After a few hours, he no longer felt pain from the first potion she gave him, but then she started giving him stronger and stronger potions. His 24 hours felt like months, but eventually they passed. He barely limped away from her cellar, cursing himself for agreeing to be trained by her. He had to admit that he felt a little tougher, though. His final training came from Devi and Angie. They told him to meet them at the library, and when he arrived, he saw that they had a mountain of books open to specific pages lying on the table. The two girls were both flying on broomsticks above Dark and were busy looking at the bookshelves on the wall. Devi noticed him and yelled, "Hi, are you ready now?" Angie turned around, noticed Dark, and the two sisters floated down to him gently. "So you have two main combat skills, your ability to morph your body and your ability to use evil magic. To make considerable progress in either field, you will need about 30 hours. Because of that, we decided to work together to teach you faster," Angie told him. Devi explained to him that she focused mostly on pure and holy magics, while Angie was more focused on evil magics. Since Devi couldn't help much with evil magic, they decided to spend their 2 days teaching him to morph his body. They started by reading 5 books on the subject, including how jelly monsters called slimes could morph their bodies. He then spent 5 hours doing what they called energy exhaustion. That was a process where he would create himself a new limb, focus so that it didn't disappear, and create another limb. After the 5 hours, he would get to about 3 extra limbs before he would lose focus trying to create a fourth, and watch in disappointment as all of his limbs melted back into his normal, shadowy body. For the next part of his training, Devi would throw a ball at him, and he would need to catch it with a new limb he created. Once he got good at that, Angie would also throw a ball, so that he would need to make himself 2 new arms to catch the balls. By the time he learned to do this, a whole day had passed. He was tired, so he didn't have time to rest. The girls slowly taught him to create new objects instead of arms or legs. After 36 hours had passed, he had the ability to create a small dagger out of his shadow-like body, and could cut through an orange with this dagger. He spent the rest of the time creating longer and longer daggers, and when his time finally ran out, he could create a short sword. He was very tired after the almost non-stop training, so before deciding who trained him the most, he fell asleep right in the library. He woke up in his bed an entire day later, and had a fantastic idea. He had learned from each lesson he attended. He went to the dining room and found the others waiting there eagerly for his arrival. They were bickering about who was going to win, saying things like, "He enjoyed mine the most," and "It's not about enjoyment, I made the most progress." He walked into the room, and the others looked at him and instantly stopped talking. He walked over and slowly sat down in his chair. "Before I give my final answer, I would like to ask you all something. Do any of you think that you could have taught me the things that anyone else taught me?" They all looked around at his confusing question, but nobody raised their hands. Sure, Regan could have shot bullets at Dark, but could he teach him to change his form? Did anyone else have the audacity to basically torture Dark into gaining a resistance to pain like Laetitia did? The answer was no, and Dark had realized that when he woke up this morning. From now on, we will be following this pattern weekly. I will spend a day learning from each of you. Feel free to teach me what you think is most important. Nobody objected, but they were a little disappointed that they didn't know who trained Dark the most. Truthfully, neither did Dark. There was a little more than 3 months left before the Tournament of Fire, and Dark planned on spending all of that time training. Chapter 7. 2 months after his training started, Armageddon told Dark that he had learned everything he could teach him. Armageddon could not fire any bullets that could hit Dark. A couple of days later, Regan and Leighton said the same. Dark could sense Leighton anywhere in the Southern Kingdom, and Regan found himself losing against Dark more and more. Dark could shoot a gun and hit a target without a second's hesitation. At the end of the 4 months, he was being trained only by the 2 witch sisters and Laetitia, although even they were quickly running out of ways to help him. But the Tournament of Flame was starting, so the 7 of them had to make their way to the Northern Kingdom. They had decided that only Dark should participate, because if they all participated, then they would be seen as a threat by large groups. Before the tournament started, many powerful groups tried to kill off the most powerful participants in the Alpha Division. They did this to increase their chances of playing against a weaker opponent in the first few rounds, and by seeming like a weak opponent, Dark minimized the chances that he was attacked. The Alpha Division of the tournament had 50 participants, and the battles were conducted in a 1-versus-1 format. The special thing about the Tournament of Flame was that the battles took place in a special dome, where spectators could not see inside. After all the matches had finished, with a participant conceding defeat or dying, the participants were teleported to a new dome with their next competitor. This made it so that nobody could know their opponent's strength beforehand, or who won any individual round. The only thing that the public would know was the winner of the tournament. This allowed the competitors to fight with all of their strength and not worry about their future opponents seeing their weaknesses. The group traveled to the Kingdom of Fire via the white dragon that Devi and Regan used to meet Dark. Flying on the dragon was less exciting than Dark expected, as all they could see were clouds. The wind rushing in his face threatened to push him off the dragon, and he didn't enjoy the ride. Luckily for Dark, they arrived at the tournament in only a few hours. The Tournament of Flame was held in a large forest called the Forest of Flames. The forest was not much like a forest, because it was shaped with 2 large rings. The first ring had many tents for all of the competitors' friends and family who wanted to wait for them while they fought, and the second ring had a large dome where competitors would fight. The Beta and Gamma divisions of the tournament had already ended, so there were only about 30 tents set up around the forest. Before Dark entered the forest, he activated a skill he had learned from Devi. The skill allowed him to shift his body and change his appearance. He wanted to look unintimidating, so that his opponents underestimated him. For that reason, he chose to look like he was still a child. He made himself look a little younger than 18, and gave himself blonde hair and tan skin. He made his eyes green, but didn't do many customizations past that. When he was done changing his appearance, and making sure nobody saw him do it, he remembered something. He had heard a few months ago that a group of Dragonborn, the most common species in the Northern Kingdom, were planning on killing any large groups before they could fight in the tournament. They did this because they were all competing in the tournament, and they wanted to be able to go easy on each other and save their strength. The plan wasn't perfect, as only one person can win the tournament, but if one person pays others a lot of money to purposely lose their fights against him, he can win the tournament easily. Either way, Dark didn't want to be targeted because his friends were with him. He asked them to return to him in 2 days when the tournament ended, and they all obediently left. With that out of the way, he walked through a single row of trees into the first ring. The first ring was just a big clearing, with about 60 to 50 tents set up. He had only expected 30, but the tents were not flashy. They were just there so that the competitors' friends had a place to sleep during the tournament. The tournament would go by fast, and Dark's first fight would be coming soon. He didn't really need a tent, as he would be spending all of his time in the domes, where he would fight opponents one after another. He didn't have any way to tell who he would be playing against. All he knew was that his fights would likely get harder as they went on. Even though 50 participants had registered, it was very common for both participants to use all of their energy and be unable to continue fighting. Thus, Dark would only really need to fight 3 or 4 times. His first fight was starting, and he heard an announcement, as if from the trees themselves. All participants move to the second ring so we can start the tournament. About 50 people stood up and almost at once and walked nervously towards a small path through the trees. They walked through one by one, and Dark followed them. On the other side of the trees was a small portal, and as each participant walked through, they were teleported to a different place. Dark walked through the portal, and he found himself in a large, open plain. He could see the sun in the sky, and he could feel its warmth on his back. About 20 feet up before him, his opponent stood. The rules were simple. Until one of them died or resigned, they would fight. His opponent was a Dragonborn. He had the upper body of a lizard and the legs of a normal human. This gave him very strong arms that could easily lift a boulder, but feet not made to run fast. Dark's opponent was not carrying a weapon, instantly telling Dark that he was a mage of some sort. Dark was about to attack, but then his opponent spoke. "You stand before the great flame mage of the Northern Kingdom. You should concede defeat now, and I won't have to harm you." Dark had heard a similar bluff thousands of times, and he was not going to give up. He rushed forward towards his opponents, flying like the wind. He moved his arm as if he were going to deliver a swift chop to his opponent's stomach. The Dragonborn knew that his skin wouldn't be fazed by a simple karate chop, and he almost laughed. Dark would hit him with a pathetic chop, and in that time he could light his hands with fire and simply touch Dark. The touch would severely burn Dark, and, if he lived, he would be in no condition to fight. The Dragonborn was happy with himself, and all he had to do was brace himself for the light impact of a chop. The Dragonborn braced himself, but the light touch never came. He looked down at himself and saw dark red blood. He looked up. Dark was standing just out of his reach. Where Dark's hand had been, instead there was a long, dark blade. Dark had morphed his hand into a longsword and cut through the Dragonborn like butter. The Dragonborn fell to the floor and stopped moving. Dark had won his first fight, and all he had to do now was wait patiently for the next one to start. Dark didn't have to wait long. In about 5 minutes, he saw a portal appear in front of him. He walked through, and he was in the exact same place. Or at least, it looked like he was in the same place. The plane was the same, and the sun was still there, but the corpse of the Dragonborn had vanished. In its place now stood Dark's next opponent. Dark's next opponent was yet another Dragonborn, wielding a sword behind his back. Dark didn't need to look at him for long to see that he was considerably weaker than his last opponent. This made Dark think that his last opponent had been paying money to give himself a good spot in the tournament bracket, where his first few fights were against weak opponents. Dark was lucky that he fought against him in the first round, because now Dark could use that good spot in the tournament to have an easy second fight. Still, Dark thought, my opponent was weak. Am I just strong, or did he pay too much money? Dark didn't need to ponder, because his opponent drew a sword from its sheath. His opponent yelled to him, "Prepare to die," and he lunged at Dark. Dark had already remade his hand instead of the long sword that took its place, and watched as his opponent approached him. Dark's opponent ran until he was a few feet away from Dark, then jumped forward at Dark with his blade outstretched. Dark was hoping that the fight would be a little bit more entertaining, but was fine with a free win too. Dark took a quick hop backwards and watched as his opponent fell to the ground in front of him. Dark remade his arm into a sword, and his opponent looked up shocked to see a blade lunging at his skull. The blade shattered his skull with sheer force, and Dark walked away slowly. The violence that unfolded did not faze Dark in the slightest, although it most certainly would have before he was reborn. Dark did a bit of math in his head. There were about 25 participants at the start, maybe 50. Then after the first round, there would be about 25 left, because some of them must have withdrawn after the first fight. Then after this round, there should be about 8 left, for the same reason. Dark would hopefully only need to fight 2 more opponents, and the stone would be his. Dark could feel as he was teleported to the next fight, and once again he found himself in the exact same plains with the exact same sun. Now, however, there was not a Dragonborn in front of him. Now there was a dark elf in front of him. The dark elf looked similar to the one killed by the goddess of light before she killed Dark. In fact, as Dark paid closer attention, he couldn't find a single difference between this elf and the one that the goddess killed. Dark was stunned for a moment, and then the elf spoke. "Hello, do you remember me?" The elf spoke with the same voice that Dark remembered. But how could the elf talk to him now? Dark had seen the elf die with his own eyes. Dark slowly opened his mouth and asked, Who are you?" The elf smiled a little, then spoke. You know who I am." Dark was shocked. The elf who had died was now standing in front of him. Dark started questioning himself. If the elf was alive, then what if the goddess hadn't killed him? Could that have been a dream? A hallucination? But how could it be? Dark remembered his death, and he remembered his past life. If he didn't die, then he wouldn't be a shadow. The elf continued to stare at Dark while talking, and Dark asked him, "Aren't you dead?" The elf looked a little shocked, and turned around to avoid Dark's gaze. "Of course I'm not dead. I'm standing right here." "But how did you survive the goddess? I saw you die." "It was just an illusion. I ran away when I had the chance." "An illusion? I didn't think that elves could make illusions." The elf turned to face Dark again, and the elf was grinning. Well, if someone knew elves could make illusions, they wouldn't be very effective. Dark thought that made sense, and was relieved to know that the elf was alive. The elf continued talking. You won't kill me, right? I need to win the tournament so I can help my children. Dark was confused. Your children? Yes, after I escaped the goddess, I started an orphanage. If I win the tournament, I can ask for money and save many children's lives. Dark wanted to win the tournament, but could he really harm the elf, especially when the elf had a worthy cause? Dark sat down on the grass and motioned for the elf to sit down too. The elf sat, but didn't speak. They sat in silence, and Dark considered other ways he could get the stone besides winning the tournament. Maybe he could ask the elf to wish for the stone and simply give the elf money? That might work. That might not work. Dark didn't know how much money his friends had left. Could he steal the stone after the tournament? He could, but that would make him the enemy of the Kingdom of Flame, and it would be a big risk. Dark thought, and was about to concede defeat when he realized something. He looked straight into the eyes of the elf and spoke boldly. Who am I? What is my name? The elf's eyes opened widely, and Dark could tell that the elf was afraid. I forgot, the elf said unconvincingly. Dark had forgotten an important detail when he saw the elf again, but remembered it while thinking of how to get the stone. The elf had spoken to him, asking if Dark remembered him. The elf had only seen Dark as a paladin, and now he had changed his appearance to look like a normal boy. There was no way the elf should have recognized him. The elf knew he had made a mistake. Looks like you figured me out, the elf said. I'm not some silly elf. I simply take the form of a person from your past. Usually, I'm someone's mother or lover, but I guess you see me as an elf. Dark had already figured this out, so he nodded and replied. What a strange skill. You change appearances. It so happens I can do the same. Dark took his true form again, that of the shadow. He could see the elf's expression. It was pure fear. You're a monster, the elf yelled. I will give you one final chance as an act of mercy. Concede. Never speak about me to anyone ever again, and I will let you live. The elf didn't think for a second. He started yelling, I concede, I concede, I concede. He faded into dust as he was teleported out of the arena. Dark thought that he was done, but there was still one more round in the tournament. Dark was surprised as he felt himself teleport to the next arena, and he didn't have enough time to morph himself back into the form of the young boy before he was teleported. This arena was slightly different from the previous ones. The sun was gone, and a bright moon took its place. The sky was filled with beautiful stars, and Dark could barely see his opponent. His opponent took a step forward, and Dark recognized them. Chapter 8. It was Miss Warbler. She was his favorite teacher, and the owner of the school he attended. She was the strongest cleric on the continent. Miss Warbler had retired years ago, but in her prime she was said to have been able to defeat hundreds of demons at a time, and defeat even the strongest monsters in the continent. But she had long since retired, and opened her own school called Miss Warbler's School for Paladins, Priests, and Clerics. She had run her own school, and also taught the most gifted students. Dark was one of those students, and he had learned a lot from her. Now she was wearing an archaeologist's outfit, complete with a hat and a satchel of water. She was retired. Why was she fighting in the tournament? Before Dark could ponder the answer to his questions, she noticed him. She spoke in a thick accent. A demon? Here? Well, I never. You lost, little guy? Not that I'd let you leave. You say your prayers now, you hear? 'Cause you're not getting another chance. Miss Warbler? Weren't you retired? Dark asked her. So you know who I am, eh? And you speak too. You're a unique one, you know. I am. Tell me, didn't you retire from fighting? What brought you to join the tournament? So you know that I'm a teacher too. I'm here 'cause an old friend asked me to test out this little toy for him. Didn't think I'd also kill a demon while I was at it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a little brown gem. Dark realized that it was one of the great stones, the great stone of the Stone Kingdom. This is perfect, Dark thought. I won't even need to visit the kingdom to get the 4 great stones. Miss Warbler didn't see that Dark was interested in the stone, and continued with their conversation. "You're a peculiar little demon, ain't you? Tell me your name, won't you?" she asked him. "Dark. I used to have a student by that name. Good. Disappeared not too long ago." "He's dead. He was killed," Dark answered truthfully. Miss Warbler raised her eyebrows at him. "Killed, you say? Did one of you lousy demons kill the bright young boy?" Dark decided to tell her the truth. "The goddess of light killed him. He learned a secret she couldn't let anyone know," he said. Miss Warbler's eyes narrowed, and she had a very serious expression. "You can't lie to my face about the goddess. Our little chat is done. Say hi to Dark and Death for me, won't you?" With those words, she raised the stone, and the ground beneath Dark started to shake. Spikes, made from solid dirt, burst out from the ground in a circle around Dark. The spikes were tall enough that he could jump over them, but before he tried, another spike pierced from the ground right into his leg. It was the strongest pain he had felt since he was reincarnated, but he managed to will himself to force his leg off the spike. He was made of darkness, and more of the thick, foggy material covered the hole in his leg. Before a second had passed, the pain went away and he was healed. He jumped out of the circle of spikes and saw the look of surprise on Miss Warbler's face. He started rushing towards her, but before he closed the distance, the ground under him rumbled again. This time, instead of a spike, a small sinkhole formed, and Dark fell into a small pit. The pit was about 15 feet deep, and spikes were already forming on the walls to impale him. Dark would have to use magic to escape the trap. He had the perfect way to escape the pit: flight. He jumped upwards, but didn't fall down. Instead, he changed the shape of his hands and feet. While his appendages kept the same size, they were now shaped like clouds of thick smoke. During his training with the Witch Sisters, he had learned that by morphing his hands and feet into cloud shapes, he could hover in the air and even fly. He flew out of the pit and straight at Miss Warbler. She didn't have time to react before he grabbed the stone out of her hands. Since he didn't have any hands, he had to hold the stone with his mouth. He could feel the stone melt into the thick, black smoke he called his body. Final level, Great Stones, 3 out of 4. Miss Warbler spun around to face Dark, who landed a few feet away from her. She was mad. "So that's how you want to do it. I give you an opportunity for a simple death, and you ruin a good stone. I'll turn you to dust with the powers of a true cleric." Dark didn't bother responding. He turned his right arm into a gun and fired a bullet directly at Miss Warbler. The bullet flew through the air at her, then disappeared in a flash of white light. Dark shot 2 more bullets, and they both disappeared in the same white light. Miss Warbler was using some form of protection spell to save her from the projectiles, so Dark decided to fight her with the sword instead. He turned both of his hands into long, sharp blades, and started to approach his opponent. Miss Warbler said something under her breath, and a sword made of white light appeared before her. She grabbed the sword with both of her hands and ran at Dark. She swung the blade over her head, directly at Dark's head, and he brought his right hand up to catch the blow, inches from his skull. The 2 swords collided, and as much as Miss Warbler pushed on the sword, Dark's blade didn't budge. "I have her now," Dark thought, and swung the sword that was his left hand at his opponent's stomach. However, before Dark's blade connected, an orange bubble surrounded Miss Warbler and caught his blade. Dark realized that this orange force field was the same thing that had destroyed his bullets. If he broke through it, the fight would be over. He pushed his left hand at the bubble with all of his might, and the bubble cracked. The crack slowly expanded across the force field, and the bubble shattered. But Dark was too focused on his left hand. He had momentarily relaxed his right hand to focus his energy on his left, and that gave Miss Warbler an opportunity to stay alive. She forced every ounce of her strength into her sword, and the sword that was Dark's right hand broke in half. If Dark continued his sword swing towards Miss Warbler's stomach, she would cut right through his head. Dark had no choice but to jump back quickly. The 2 stood still for a couple of seconds, catching their breath. Dark's right hand had healed, and an even longer sword had grown in place of the last. Miss Warbler, however, did not have her protective force field back. She had also used too much of her strength staying alive in the last exchange, that it was clear to both of them that she would die in their next encounter. Dark ran towards her and she had to choose whether to fight on to the bitter end or try to concede before he reached her. It was a big rule for those who were holy and served the rat light. Surrendering to a monster is unacceptable, while dying to protect your friends would send you to a peaceful afterlife. Miss Warbler wanted to concede, but knew that she couldn't afford to. If word got out that she lost to a demon, she would surely lose her job and her school, and possibly be killed by someone loyal to the rules of the light. She also had lost a great stone. Surely that lost all of her credibility and the dignity she had left. Despite this, her choice was simple. She wanted to live. She opened her mouth to concede, ready to be teleported out of the arena. Then she felt it, in her heart. Dark had approached faster than she thought was possible, and his sword had already impaled her. She wanted to concede, but couldn't. She was dead. Chapter 9. Dark was happy that he won the tournament, and didn't even notice that Miss Warbler wanted to concede. He remembered her as a loyalist to the light, and since she didn't even consider that the goddess was evil, he didn't think there was even a slight chance she wanted to concede. He didn't bother thinking about Miss Warbler for any longer. He was excited to get his prize. He felt himself be slowly teleported out of the arena, and quickly changed his form back into that of the child. He found himself in a wooden cabin. Through the windows he could see the lawn where all of the tents were set up. In the center of the cabin there was a table covered with a rich red cloth, and 2 chairs carved masterfully out of wood. There was a fireplace in the corner, and wood was slowly burning to warm the cabin. At the table sat a dragonborn, and he motioned for Dark to take a seat. The dragonborn had golden skin and wore a rich royal cape. Dark could tell that this was the king of the Northern Kingdom, and he sat down at the table without question. The king spoke. "Congratulations on winning the tournament. I think it's safe to say that nobody expected you to win. Tell me your name." Dark didn't intend to give him his real name, especially since he was only here to get the stone. "My name is Reuben," Dark said. That was the first name Dark thought of, and the king seemed satisfied with the answer. "You can now make your wish, and almost anything you ask for I will give you without question." Dark was concerned by the word almost, and was curious as to what the king was implying. "Almost?" Dark asked him. The king smiled. "Do you know how I became king?" "No." "I won the tournament myself 15 years ago, and I asked to rule this kingdom. The previous king fought me to the death, and saying that the winner would lead. This is how it has been since the kingdom started." Dark did not want to rule the kingdom, so he asked the king to give him the Great Stone. "The Great Stone of Flames." "Certainly a treasure, but we can spare it for the winner of the tournament." He clapped his hands, and a bundle of cloth appeared in his hands. He handed the cloth to Dark, and Dark slowly unwrapped it without touching the stone. The stone was, in fact, inside. Dark rewrapped the bundle and thanked the king before heading outside the cabin. When he went into the field where the tents were set up, many people turned to face him. Reporters looked at him eagerly, clearly hoping that he would give them a statement or a chance to conduct an interview. Dark shook his head and walked through the thick trees out of the clearing. His friends were all waiting for him outside of the trees and waved at him. They ran over to him. "Hi," Angie said. "You got the stone, right?" "I actually got 2 stones." Angie's eyes widened, and Devi even gasped. He showed them the bundle and started unwrapping it. This was it. When he unwrapped the bundle, he would absorb the last stone and achieve his last level of strength. He unwrapped the cloth and touched the stone inside. The stone melted into his skin. Final level reached. Skill unlocked. Teleportation. Skill unlocked. Perfect sense. Skill unlocked. Shadow's madness. Dark felt as his skin changed. The thick smoke that was forming his body condensed and was almost solid. Dark tried changing his form and realized that he could change from a solid to a gas at will. He experimented for a few minutes. He could turn his legs into gas and could float through the air like a genie, a magical creature said to fly and grant wishes. He could morph his body from solid to a gas to avoid an attack too. He decided to test out his new skills. He looked a few feet away from him at an anthill, and as soon as he decided to teleport there, he found himself standing directly on top of the anthill with ants crawling on his shoes. He teleported again and stomped his feet a few times to leave the ants behind. He liked the ability to teleport and started thinking of ways to use it in combat. Then he activated his skill, perfect sense. It was overwhelming. His sixth sense had expanded drastically. He could sense every creature below the ground all the way to the core of the land, and could sense every person in every city around the continent without trouble. There were more continents, though. He could feel overseas that there were more islands, with other species of people, too. But he didn't focus on this, because he could sense her. Her. The goddess of light was in her palace. Dark could sense that she was there. He knew how far away from him she was. He could sense what was on the elusive upper floors of the palace, and his theories were correct. He sensed corpses and bones. Those floors were used to torture and kill people. Dark was tempted to teleport straight into her palace and kill her, but that would be too reckless. What if she had a trap planned for him? He decided he would approach on foot, with his friends to help him. Speaking of his friends, he could sense two people about halfway between him and the palace of the goddess. He sensed Derek and Rita. They were his friends before he was killed, and they helped him defeat the Central Kingdom of Darkness. Perfect, Dark thought. An opportunity to test out my last skill. Dark looked around at his friends and signaled for them to follow him. He instructed them to allow him to fight Rita and Derek, and his friends nodded in agreement. He flew towards his friends from his past life, and his current companions couldn't keep up with him. While Dark flew, he changed his form to that of his more normal self. He was pitch black, but his eyes were still red. He was almost entirely solid, with only his hands and feet wispy to let him fly. He approached the two and landed. Rita was wearing a white cloak and had green hair. He approached the two and landed. Derek was wearing a cowboy hat and a similarly styled vest. They were surprised to see him here, but Derek instinctively reached for the book he carried at his hip. "Stop," Dark said in a commanding voice. The two were caught off guard when he appeared, and were so shocked that he could talk that they both froze in place. Dark thought to activate his skill, Shadow Madness, and two long, dark spears thrust out of his hands. The two spears hit his old friends in less than a second, right in their chests. The spears cut a hole into them, then disappeared. Blood wasn't flowing out of their wounds. Instead, the wounds were resealed by black smoke that hardened into thick, black, scaly skin with the same texture as a snake's. Then, from the point where their chests were covered with thick skin, the black material started to spread. As it traveled along their bodies, it corrupted their normal skin, turning it from normal human skin to the same black snake-like skin. The darkness spread to their entire bodies and their eyes. Their eyes were not bright and green anymore. They were as dark as the night sky. It looked as if their pupils had expanded until their entire eyes were pupils. Then, their eyes started to glow. Their eyes glowed bright red, just like Dark's. When the transformation was complete, the two were perfectly still. His current friends had arrived just in time to see the transformation finished, and Angie was exhilarated. "That was so cool! I knew it was the right idea to serve you." Dark was past feeling sorry for normal humans, and he didn't really notice Angie's compliment. He continued towards the goddess palace, and the two abominations he created followed him. Along the way, he stopped at a little farm to rest. The farmer who ran the farm tried to stab the one that used to be Rita with a pitchfork, but that was a big mistake. Rita touched him with a single finger, and within a moment the farmer had also been turned into the same type of monster. Dark's jaw dropped. He could turn normal people into loyal monsters that could turn other people into loyal monsters. The farm was built of a single shack in a field. Inside the shack there was only one bed, so this group decided to just rest for a few minutes on the floor. During his rest at the farm, he thought of the perfect plan to deal with the goddess. All that was left was to put it into motion. Chapter 10. The sun had set, and the moon was crawling into the night sky. The three monsters Dark commanded blended in perfectly with the night sky, and all that was visible of them were their glowing red eyes. Dark started walking toward the palace of the goddess, which he could barely see in the distance. His friends followed him silently, and the monsters that used to be people did too. 5 minutes of walking passed, and he was almost at the front gate. As he approached it, the 2 guards stationed outside screamed, "Demons! Demons! There are demons out here!" The guards ran inside the city's walls, leaving the gate open in their terror. "Touch as many people as you can," Dark instructed the 3 monsters, hoping he could corrupt most of the city. They started walking into the city. The 3 guards with spears met them at the gate. One guard threw a spear at what used to be Derek, and even with the spear sticking out of his chest, he was unfazed. Within a minute, the guards were monsters too. The 5 monsters went further into the city, and Dark could hear screams. The city went berserk. People were screaming. People were running in all directions. Guards couldn't calm anyone down, and people were getting corrupted by the second. Dark hesitated for just a second, then entered the city. He saw the panic in the streets, and smiled a little. Surely this panic would force all of the warriors of the city to focus on his forces, and he could fight the goddess 1 versus 1. "What should we do?" Regan asked. Dark turned around and saw that Regan had drawn his weapons already. All of them had. "They are prepared for a fight. I might as well let them have it," Dark thought to himself. "The city's warriors will be arriving soon," Dark said. "Deal with them, and the citizens too. Leave nobody who could potentially interfere with our fight alive," Dark commanded them. "My lord, everyone could potentially interfere with your fight against the goddess," Armageddon pointed out. "If you believe that, then you can kill everyone." His 6 friends nodded, and he turned towards the palace. It was still about a mile away, but with his teleportation skill, he reached the front gate in less than a second. Guards and warriors were rushing out of the palace to fight against the monsters he summoned that have already spread to the hundreds, but he wasn't interested in them. He walked up the steps and into the throne room. He wasn't stopped. There was nobody left to stop him. He pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. In the room, standing by her throne, was the goddess of light herself. She saw Dark and turned towards him. You're in charge of all of this, right? He sent you, didn't he?" Dark wasn't paying much attention to what she was saying. His anger that he had been harboring since he was reincarnated resurfaced. "I am here to kill you," he said, and morphed his hands into the sharpest blades he could. "You are a buffoon. I can create 8 shields at once." As if to prove her point, the goddess snapped her fingers. About a foot away from her, an orange bubble formed, similar to the one that Miss Warbler had made. But then, around that bubble formed another, and another, and another, and another, and another. One by one, 8 bubbles formed around each other. The message was clear. Dark couldn't break through. The goddess started chanting, and from the ceiling a beam of massive light shined down at him. He jumped backwards, but the beam barely grazed his right foot. His foot instantly turned to stone, and what was worse, slowly his leg started to petrify. If Dark had reacted slower, he would have been turned entirely to stone, but he quickly chopped off the entirety of his right leg. The part he chopped off healed quickly, but the leg that was lying on the floor was completely stone. The message was clear. Dark could not dodge her attacks forever. Eventually, he would make a mistake, and after Dark's mistake, he would die. But if Dark couldn't attack because of the bubbles, and couldn't defend because her attacks were too strong, what was he to do? Dark had thought about this at the farm. "You should beg for mercy," the goddess said with a smile. "If you return now, he might even spare you." "Certainly, that would be a bet. She was cut off, literally. Dark teleported inside of her little bubbles and delivered 3 quick slashes with his swords. The goddess saw her arm in the air, separate from the rest of her body. She didn't feel the pain of her arm being cut off, because a millisecond later, her head followed. Dark killed her the same way she killed him, but this time there would be no reincarnation. Dark fell to his knees, not from physical exhaustion, but because he had finally achieved his goal. He stood up, and he slowly walked towards the entrance to the throne room, and then through the door onto the stairs leading up to the goddess palace. From there he could see the entire city below, and that's where he saw it. Blood. A lot of blood. The city square that had once been the city center for markets and shopping was now a pile of bodies and a pool of blood. Angie was stabbing the last human, and after he fell to the ground, she looked up, saw him, and flew over. "What did you do?" Dark asked. "I don't know. The shadow guys just started killing, and we did too. You gave us permission, remember?" Dark felt sick. Not only had all of this killing been done by his comrades, but he had ordered them to. He could finally think clearly without the rage suppressing his thoughts, and realized that he had likely killed more people than the goddess did. And for what? Revenge? He had been given an opportunity to avenge himself, and he used that opportunity to slaughter an entire city. Not only that, he had killed merfolk too. He killed to get 3 of the stones. He killed people with families and dreams. And what was the goal of all of this killing? To kill another person? Dark wanted to throw up. What had he done? Dark looked up into the night sky and screamed. He yelled at the top of his lungs, "What have I done?" He then thought in his head that he was a monster. He couldn't be seen as a normal person anywhere in the world, and he was also had killed thousands on top of that. He had one single thought left in his mind, and it kept circling over and over again. What have I become? Then, at that moment, the voice returned. The deep voice that he had heard along his entire journey, reminding him of each skill, of each progression, of each level, came again with another message. You have become perfect.